Ned Stark stood on the raised platform, his wrists bound in rough rope, the sun beating mercilessly on the back of his neck. There was a ringing in his ears that drowned out all other noise. It might have been the roar of the crowd, or it might have been the hammering of his own heart. He tasted metal on his tongue, and felt the perspiration trickle down his brow. His last thoughts lingered on his family: Catelyn, Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Rickon. Each one a pulse of sorrow. He had given himself up to save them. Sansa stood somewhere in that throng of faces, tears glimmering in her eyes. Arya too might be there, though he could not see her. He closed his eyes for a moment as the call went out to bring the sword down upon him. He imagined the chill of the north's wind, the solemn walls of Winterfell, the voice of a weirwood tree in a quiet godswood. Then he heard shouts, but these shouts were different. There was confusion, sudden commotion, a stifled cry. He prepared himself for the final blow, but it did not come. He dared to open his eyes. A hush settled across the crowd. Far behind the line of gold-cloaked guards, he caught sight of Yoren, the Black Brother from the Night's Watch. Weaving through the throng, his face set in determination. Yet it was not Yoren who had intervened. Instead, standing beside Joffrey's dais, the spider, Varys, lifted a hand as if to signal something. Joffrey Baratheon, perched on the edge of his seat with a mad gleam of cruelty in his young eyes, suddenly looked uncertain. Beside him, Cersei whispered furiously in his ear. Then Joffrey lifted his hand, and the Kingsguard in front of Ned lowered the executioner's sword. The wave of confusion rippled outward. People started to shout, though it was unclear if they clamored for Ned's death or for mercy. Varys glided toward the front of the platform, his face slack and unreadable as ever. But something in his eyes made Ned think that the eunuch had plotted this moment for days. Two gold cloaks seized Ned by the arms and forced him roughly to his knees. The rope bit into his skin, but he barely felt it. The stench of fear and sweat clouded the air, and the heat pressed down upon everyone like a smothering blanket. Joffrey rose to his feet. "He has confessed his treason," the Boy King announced, his voice cracking with forced gravity. "He does not deserve the mercy I've granted him." His glance flicked from Varys to Cersei, and then to the restless crowd. "Yet, my Lady Mother advises caution." He drew the word out, as if it pained him to speak it. Ned's breath came in ragged heaves, his mind spinning. He had braced himself for the blow of the sword, and found none. With trembling knees, he kept as still as possible, trying to master the trembling in his stomach. "There's a need for a hostage," Cersei said, her voice cool and collected. She stepped forward in a swirl of green silk and golden hair, speaking to the crowd as much as to Joffrey. "We have his daughter. We could spare his life for a time, as long as it brings peace in the north." She cast a meaningful look at the lords arrayed at court, a gentle smile playing on her lips. "Lord Stark will serve as a reminder that the king's justice is swift, yet merciful." The crowd gave an uncertain cheer, some seeming disappointed that no blood was shed, others grateful that they would not have to witness the horrific spectacle. The tension in the air did not lessen, though. Soldiers grabbed Ned's arms, dragging him upright, and the jagged rope on his wrists ground his flesh. He did not dare to look for Sansa, for fear that he might see the heartbreak in her eyes. He wondered about Arya too, and prayed to the old gods that she had run far from this place. They hustled him back into the darkness of the Red Keep, where corridors twisted like a labyrinth of stone. Every step resounded with heavy footfalls, and he felt his heart thudding dully in his chest. His mouth was bone dry, his throat parched from the scorching day's heat and the surge of terror. As they marched through the halls, he could sense the presence of Lannister guards to either side. Their armor clinked. The hush of the keep pressed in on him, ominous as a tomb. Finally, they brought him to a small chamber, far less dank than the dungeon cells. The door slammed shut. The key turned in the lock, and Ned was left alone, crumpled on the hard stone floor. For the first time, he let out the breath he had been holding. His body shook. He had been so certain that he would die. He closed his eyes, feeling tears threaten, though whether from relief or despair, he could not say. He remembered Cersei's words, a need for a hostage. So that was his fate now. to be kept as leverage against the North. It seemed a precarious mercy. Joffrey would no doubt clamor to have his head at the first sign of disobedience from Robb, or from Ned himself. Still, it was another day to live, a chance to see his daughters again. Perhaps he could find a way out of King's Landing, a means to return to the North. But the chains, though invisible, were real enough. Joffrey's reign was tenuous, the Lannisters were cunning, and Ned was alone, with no swords at his back, no allies within these walls. He pressed his forehead to the cold floor, letting the stone ground his swirling thoughts. When the door opened again, candlelight revealed Varys slipping in, glancing over his shoulder as though he feared watchers in the corridor. The eunuch gave a shallow bow. "Lord Stark," he said gently, "I see you have been granted the king's clemency." Ned worked his stiff limbs, lifting himself to a seated position. The rope was gone from his wrists, though his skin was rubbed raw. "Why?" he croaked. The single word carried all the confusion and anger building within him. He had stood before the entire city, forced to admit treason he had never committed, to brand himself a traitor to the very realm he had served. And at the brink, Varys had intervened somehow. Varys cocked his head, his perfumed sleeves wafting a faint scent as he glided closer. "Sometimes words can spare a man's life," he said, not unkindly. "My little birds have been telling me this city is on a precipice. Joffrey is unpredictable. Queen Cersei is cunning, but she is not her father. The realm teeters on the edge of war. Lord Stark, you serve better as a bargaining chip than as a corpse." Ned's eyes searched Varys' face, looking for any hint of duplicity or hidden motives. The eunuch's bland features offered little. "You didn't do it out of kindness," Ned said at last, his voice flat with fatigue. "I can't imagine a single kind deed that costs you more than it gains." Varys offered a thin smile that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Kindness is rare in the Red Keep, I fear," he said. "But you are not wrong, my lord. Your survival might serve my ends. Though what those ends are, I suspect even you would not guess." His expression was almost wistful. "I shall arrange for you to have water and a proper bedchamber. You will remain confined, of course, but you will at least enjoy some degree of comfort. It is the best I can do for the moment." Weariness wrapped itself around Ned's bones, and a vast sense of helplessness threatened to swallow him. Still, he would not relinquish hope. If he lived, if he had a chance, then perhaps he could protect his daughters, or at least Sansa, who remained within the palace. Arya, if the gods were good, had slipped away, and Robb was in the north, mustering the banners. Would word reach him that Ned yet lived? Would it make any difference? "Why did the boy king waver?" he asked, his voice softer now, searching for answers. "He wished for my head, that was plain." "Because you confessed to treason in front of all," Varys replied with a small shrug. "That was the queen's wish. The confession placates some. Enough, at least, to stay Joffrey's hand for a time. Public spectacle can be a potent tool, Lord Stark. Do not discount its power. Your words in the courtyard painted you as a traitor and a fool. Now, few will rush to defend the foolish traitor who so easily bent the knee. The Lannisters can shape the story any way they please, but with your life still in their hands, they can negotiate with Robb." Ned closed his eyes again, recalling how he had proclaimed himself a traitor to the throne, how he had labeled his own actions as treason. The taste of betrayal lingered on his lips. Honor demanded he speak truth, but he had spoken lies instead. Lies to save his daughter, his family, or so he had believed. That is what he told himself. But the shame would linger. The following days blended into a sickly pattern. Ned was taken from the cramped chamber to a larger room with a narrow window that admitted a slash of daylight. A cot with a half-stuffed mattress awaited him, along with a pitcher of water and a tray of stale bread, salted fish, and wrinkled fruit. Guards posted themselves outside his door, gold cloaks with grim, silent faces. He was allowed to bathe under watchful eyes. The castle's water, tepid and smelling faintly of stagnant cisterns, was still a blessing to his bruised limbs. Time unfurled slowly. The only visitors, aside from the guards who brought his meals, were Varys and sometimes a timid servant girl. Varys would arrive with quiet steps, ask cordial questions, and supply small scraps of news. Once, the eunuch told him that the city was swirling with rumors of war. Robb Stark had marched south from Winterfell, calling the banners. Jaime Lannister had clashed with the Tully forces near Riverrun. Tywin Lannister was gathering an army. Tensions were sky-high. And all the while, Joffrey reigned in King's Landing, mostly at the behest of his mother and the ever-spinning web of Lannister power. At length, Ned dared to ask after his daughters again. Varys sighed. "Arya is nowhere to be found, my lord. But Sansa remains betrothed to King Joffrey. She is safe, so long as she is obedient." Ned felt a pain cut through him at these words. Sansa was still a child, forced to please the capricious boy who had nearly ordered Ned's execution. And Arya was out there, alone. Or perhaps not alone, he hoped. He prayed to the old gods that she had found Yoren. By the time the moon had gone full and waned again, Ned had come to realize that this uneasy stalemate could not last forever. Sooner or later, Joffrey would tire of being merciful, or Robb would strike some blow that would force the Lannisters to respond in kind. He began to formulate a plan, though it felt more like a desperate wish than anything tangible. Still, he would need help if he were to escape the Red Keep alive. And so one evening, when Varys came bearing his usual quiet news, Ned spoke directly. "You want stability for the realm," he said. "You want power kept in check. Though how, I cannot say. But you have told me you oppose chaos, that you act in the realm's interest. Then help me return to the north. Help me keep the city from plunging into madness." "Nanti." Varys folded his hands. Candlelight cast his shadow, tall and dark, against the wall. "You speak of a dangerous game, Lord Stark. And you presume that your presence in the north would stabilize the realm. Perhaps it might. The people revere you. They trust your honor. The Lannisters do not. Which is precisely why they hold you. Helping you escape would be an act of great risk to me." "Then let me and my daughters go," Ned said. "If war must come, at least let the innocents be spared. I would rather face my enemies on the battlefield than rot in a cell. If I can speak to Robb, I might yet steer him away from bloodshed, or at least limit it." "Now?" Varys' gaze flicked to the door as if worried some eavesdropper lurked there. "I cannot do so alone," he murmured. "There are powers greater than I in King's Landing. But perhaps there may be a time and a method. If I can find the means to smuggle you out, it will be done quietly. Swiftly. We must wait for the right moment. Until then, Lord Stark, keep your eyes open and your mouth shut." For weeks more, Ned waited. News of fighting arrived in scattered snatches. Robb had indeed defeated a Lannister force in the Whispering Wood, capturing Jaime Lannister. Ned let out an involuntary gasp at that revelation. The Kingslayer, captive to the young wolf. This was a piece of astonishing news that could change everything. Varys smiled thinly, clearly measuring Ned's reaction. Then more tidings. Tywin Lannister had regrouped. The Riverlands were aflame, and the lords of the north clamored for vengeance for Ned's supposed treason. War was spreading like a brushfire across the realm. The small folk fled the fields, seeking shelter behind castle walls. The city itself hummed with fear and hostility. Joffrey's cruelty became more erratic. Sansa was seen rarely, always accompanied by Lannister guards. At last, one night Varys came in the hour of the owl, cloak drawn tight around him. His face was pale, his tone urgent. "It must be tonight," he said. "I have arranged a means for you to leave the castle, but it will not last. We must hurry." Ned's heart pounded. He had been pacing in his small chamber, half-dressed. Reaching for the boots he had laid aside, he wondered if this could be a trap. But what choice did he have? "And my daughter?" he whispered. "Sansa?" Varys' mouth tightened. "I can only get you out tonight, but I promise, Lord Stark, I will look to Sansa. Perhaps I can see her safely away on another night. For now, saving you is all I can arrange." Torn between paternal guilt and the frantic hope of freedom, Ned felt the weight of his honor pressing down on him like a millstone. But the memory of the sword at his neck urged him on. He had to get out if he wished to help Sansa in the future. If he could reach Robb, perhaps a trade could be made, or an arrangement forced. The realm was at war, but the Lannisters valued their pride. Above all, they would not want to lose the final advantage of Sansa's betrothal. If Ned were free, there might be bargains yet to strike. He seized the moment. Varys pressed a key into his hand. Then the eunuch led him through the corridors, both moving with hushed urgency. They passed sleeping guards, forging deeper into the bowels of the keep than Ned had ever been. Torchlight flickered along the rough-hewn walls. A faint scuttling of rats accompanied them, and the air smelled stale and damp. The path twisted and turned. Finally, they emerged into a cramped tunnel. Varys pointed Ned onward, pressing a bundle into his arms. "A cloak, some coin, and a few scraps of food," he said quietly. "At the end of this passage you will find stairs that lead to a postern gate. A friend waits for you there, though I dare not name him. May the gods be with you, Lord Stark. Remember, this kingdom is not so easily mended. Beware the hunts that will come. I have done all I can." Then Ned clasped his hand around Varys. "Thank you," he managed. He did not trust the man fully. How could he? But he recognized that tonight's risk was no small thing. The passage was cramped, and the darkness nearly absolute. Ned groped along the walls, feeling the stones slick with condensation. His breath sounded too loud in his ears. At last, he reached a narrow flight of stairs. He emerged behind a crumbling wall, stepping into fresh air for the first time in weeks. The night was cool, the sky spangled with stars. The roar of the Blackwater rush distant yet distinct. A figure waited, a hooded shape that beckoned urgently. "Quiet, my lord," the voice hissed. "This way." Ned followed, heart pounding. He recognized the stance and the glimpses of gray hair. It was Jory Castle's cousin, a guardsman from Winterfell who had come south with them, but vanished during the chaos. He had hidden himself, it seemed. They slipped past a dozing watchman, the guard's pike leaning against the gate. Fear coiled in Ned's stomach at every creak of the old gate door. But they passed through undetected, stepping into the city's lower streets. There, a donkey cart awaited them, a battered tarp covering the back. Ned climbed in, pulling the tarp over his legs. The city smelled of refuse and rotting fish from the harbor. They wound through the labyrinth of alleys until they reached a lesser-known postern in the city walls. More bribed guards, more watchful eyes. The tension was suffocating, but at last they were outside the walls. A black sky stretched overhead, dotted with stars that reminded Ned of the north. The donkey's hooves clacked against the hard ground. They traveled in silence for a while, neither daring to speak. Then, once the glow of King's Landing's torchlit walls had dwindled behind them, Ned let out a shaking breath. Free. He was free. But Sansa was still within that pit of vipers. The thought haunted him, but he could not return. Not now. He had to find Robb, muster the North. If he could bring a great enough force to bear, maybe they could bargain for Sansa's release, or force a peace that would spare thousands of lives. They traveled through the night, moving swiftly. By dawn, they had changed the donkey cart for a pair of horses, purchased from a reluctant stable master with the Lannister coins that Varys had supplied. Ned pulled the hood of his cloak low over his brow. His face was known. The Lannisters would send out search parties as soon as they realized he was gone. But the roads were chaotic with refugees fleeing the war zones, farmers and villagers who wanted no part in the bloodshed. With careful deception, Ned might pass among them. Days stretched into a blur of dusty roads, hidden campsites, and anxious glances over shoulders. Word trickled through the traveling folk of battles to the west and the north. At one lonely inn, Ned overheard talk that the young wolf had hammered the Lannisters again, capturing entire hosts. Some said the Freys had declared for the Starks. Others said the Freys were only biding their time. Rumors spun about the king in the north. How Robb Stark had earned that moniker after the execution of Ned Stark? Ned felt a sharp pang of bitterness and pride, a mixture of relief that Robb was leading, and sorrow that the realm believed him dead. It took all his will to keep moving, to remain inconspicuous. If he revealed himself too soon, 1,000 hidden dangers could arise. But at last, while skirting the riverlands, he found a band of Northmen, clad in leathers and mail with the direwolf sigil proudly displayed. Ned's throat tightened at the sight. He wanted to run to them immediately, proclaim who he was. But caution held him back. Instead, he sent his companion forward to make discreet inquiry. When the men realized Lord Eddard Stark lived, they nearly fell from their saddles in shock. Ned kept his voice low, his manner somber. "I need to see my son," he said. "Is he at Riverrun?" That was the rumor Freys had shared, that Robb had moved the seat of his campaign to Riverrun after liberating it from the siege. The Northmen exchanged furtive looks. Their captain, a grizzled bannerman Ned recognized from Winterfell, stepped forward, eyes shining. "My lord, we believed you gone," he said, voice quavering. "Your death changed everything. Robb is not just at Riverrun, he is called the King in the North." Ned felt an ache behind his eyes, as though he might weep from relief and confusion. "The King in the North," he echoed softly. "Lead me to him." They moved northward with haste. The Riverlands had been ravaged by skirmishes. Burned villages, fields trampled by cavalry. Flocks of crows hovered over ruined farms. Ned clenched his jaw at the sight, thinking of the small folk. War brought devastation to those who could least defend themselves. The weight of responsibility for this conflict pressed upon him more heavily than ever, though he knew the Lannisters bore much blame. Perhaps, if he had never accepted Robert's offer to come south and serve as hand, if he had never delved into the bastard lineage of the Baratheons, the realm might have remained at peace. Yet the truth would have come out eventually, he told himself. The Lannisters' hold on power had been tenuous, riddled with secrets. Sooner or later, it all would have unraveled. As they approached Riverrun, the banners snapped in the breeze. The Trout of Tully beside the direwolf of Stark. Soldiers at the gate snapped to attention, their faces etched with fatigue. When Ned drew back his hood, a jolt of astonishment rippled through them. They did not know whether to rejoice or sound the alarm. But the word spread quickly. Lord Eddard Stark was alive. A tide of whispers enveloped the fortress, and men came running from barracks and guard posts. Catelyn, hearing the uproar, came hurrying across the courtyard. She froze when she saw him, face draining of color, eyes wide with shock and hope. Ned dismounted and staggered a few steps, feeling numb. Catelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as she realized that the man before her was not a ghost. She ran to him, and he pulled her into a fierce embrace, the world spinning around them. He murmured her name over and over, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease into trembling relief. Then Robb appeared, flanked by Grey Wind, the great direwolf. Robb's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, but when he saw Ned, his jaw went slack in disbelief. "Father?" he whispered, voice breaking. "Gods be good, Father." In a moment, the young man was across the courtyard, wrapping Ned in a tight hug that spoke to the weeks of grief he had endured. Ned felt how his son had changed. He was taller than Ned remembered, harder somehow, with lines of worry carved into his face. He was no longer the boy who had stood uncertain at his father's side. War had forced him into manhood far too soon. Soldiers around them gaped, some crossing themselves as though beholding a miracle. Others cheered, a ragged cry that echoed within the walls. Catelyn brushed tears from her cheeks. Robb's face was a mixture of joy and shock. "We were told they brought your bones north," Robb said, voice strangled. Ned shook his head, swallowing hard. "A trick of the Lannisters," he said, "no doubt to incite the North. They wanted your anger, your vengeance. They thought it would be to their advantage, or at least, that it would keep the realm divided." Catelyn's hand gripped Ned's arm as though she feared he might disappear if she let go. "How did you escape them?" she asked. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He told them the broad strokes, various intervention, the ruse, the flight from King's Landing. He spoke of Sansa's plight, how he had left her there. He could see the heartbreak in Catelyn's eyes. The mention of Arya missing weighed on them too, but they clung to the hope that at least Ned lived. Robb exhaled, pacing back and forth as the courtyard filled with more curious onlookers. Many still stared in amazement. "They crowned me king in the north after we heard of your death," Robb explained. "The lords of the north and the Riverlands refused to bend the knee to Joffrey." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "I never wanted a crown, father. But they demanded independence, and I had to lead them. I swore to avenge you. But now we must think carefully," Ned said, speaking softly, but with an urgency that carried to those around him. "Joffrey and the Lannisters hold Sansa. They will use her to manipulate us. If the North is declared independent, they will see it as an act of open rebellion. The war might become even bloodier." Robb's jaw tightened. "The lords have already bent the knee to me as their king. We have outrun the possibility of retreat on that point. If we renounce the crown now, it might fracture our alliances and sow confusion. The River Lords have pledged themselves to the king in the north. Mother's family, her uncle Brynden Tully, supports our cause wholeheartedly." Ned's weary eyes swept the fortress. Men in stark livery mingled with Tully men from smaller houses, even a few Riverland knights who brandished their sigils with pride. The sense of unity was palpable, but it was unity forged in the name of a new king. Ned realized that in his absence, events had outstripped any single solution. Could he, as the rightful Lord of Winterfell, simply ask them to bow to a southern king they despised, especially a king as monstrous as Joffrey? It would be a betrayal of their trust, their pain, the blood spilled in Ned's name. "You are their king," Ned said, acknowledging that truth to Robb. "But I am still your father. We need to speak privately, to plan. War is not something to be undertaken lightly, though we are in the thick of it already." With that, Robb led Ned and Catelyn into the great hall of Riverrun. Guards posted themselves at the doors. The hall smelled of rushes and hearth smoke. They stood around a large oak table scattered with parchments, battle maps marked with figurines representing armies. Brynden, Blackfish. Tully joined them, nodding solemnly to Ned, his face etched with relief. Edmure Tully was absent, off attending to the remnants of the conflict around the Riverlands. Robb gestured at the board. "We have victories in the field, but the Lannisters are numerous, with more gold than we can match. Tywin Lannister has regrouped near Harrenhal, and we still hold Jaime Lannister prisoner." Mendirtine, a glimmer of an idea, took root in Ned's mind. "We have their son, they have my daughter," he murmured. "Possible exchange, if negotiated with the proper advantage." He paused, glancing at Robb's face. "But you're a king now, they say. The king in the north. That complicates matters." Catelyn brushed a lock of auburn hair from her face. "Robb's bannermen demanded independence. They said the Iron Throne is no longer legitimate, that the South betrays us, that only a Stark can rule the North." Her eyes flicked to Ned. "They believed you were murdered at the hands of the Lannisters, and they would not bow to a Lannister king." Ned felt the grief for the thousands who had died already. "Our forebears once ruled as kings of winter," he said, as though tasting the words on his tongue. "We bent the knee to the Iron Throne to keep peace. Now peace is shattered. The question is, do we truly want to hold the entire North separate from the rest of the realm? It will mean new challenges, new enemies." His gaze held Robb's. "Yet I understand why it has happened." Robb looked away, his expression taut. "When I was first proclaimed, I had no choice. It felt right, if only to unify those who refused Joffrey's claim. Now, after the war we've seen, there may be no going back. But I never wanted to usurp your role. Father, if you wish the crown, it is yours by right." Ned shook his head. "I am no king. My honor was always as a warden of the North, a guardian. But you have fought battles, led men, kept the alliances. I will serve you, my son, if that is what the North wills. Yet I am still your father, and we must work together for the good of our people." "May." Robb blinked, eyes shining with emotion he tried to restrain. "You are here," he said, almost in disbelief. "That is more than I dared hope for." Catelyn took Ned's hand. "For now, we should let our bannermen see you." It will give them heart. Then we must plan. We cannot allow Sansa to remain a hostage, nor can we let the Lannisters regroup without challenge. Brynden Tully added his gruff agreement. We have Jaime in chains. That is a powerful piece on the board. If we can secure Sansa's safe return, we might sue for an armistice that benefits us. Or, if the boy king is as mad as they say, war may continue. Still, we hold a better position with you alive, Lord Eddard. Than Redditor. A flare of determination steadied Ned. The realm was a tinderbox, the lines of loyalty starkly drawn. If the North truly broke away from the Iron Throne, it would set a precedent that might echo through generations. Yet perhaps that was the path the old gods had set before them. The North had always been half a kingdom unto itself. Vast, cold, a realm of stoic lords and loyal men. Now, with Ned's survival, they could present a united front with the new king in the North. They spent hours speaking in hushed voices, poring over maps, and discussing the conditions in the North. Winterfell was lightly garrisoned but safe enough, thanks to the watchful eyes of Maester Luwin and those men who had remained behind. Bran and Rickon were there, too young to be part of the war effort. Word would need to be sent to them that their father was alive. The news would bring joy. But security was paramount. The Raven must be carefully guarded, lest the message be intercepted. A council was convened the next day, in the broad courtyard of Riverrun. The assembled lords, knights, and captains of the host gathered, some wearing the stag of Baratheon, those who had once sworn to King Robert, now thrown into confusion, others, the dire wolf or the trout. Rumor had spread quickly that Eddard Stark was alive. Men craned their necks, wanting to see proof with their own eyes. Ned stood beside Robb, who wore the trappings of the king in the North, armor polished, a fur cloak draped over his shoulders. The men's cheers at the sight of Ned were mingled with awe. Robb's face showed a flicker of uncertainty. He was the king, yet he stood next to the father they all revered. Ned lifted a hand for silence. The hush was instantaneous. His voice carried across the yard. You all believed me dead. I stand before you now thanks to the cunning of a few brave souls and the grace of the gods. He paused, letting them see the strain in his face. I have been in the hands of our enemies. I know their cruelty and their power, but I also know their weakness, their overconfidence. They hold my daughter as a hostage. They believe that we will bend the knee to them. Tell me, are you prepared to bend the knee? Bannon. A chorus of "No" roared up from the throng, fierce as a wolf's howl. Men banged their swords against their shield. The wave of defiance made Ned's heart soar with pride, even as it weighed on him with the knowledge of coming battles. Robb stepped forward. Grey wind padded at his side, the massive direwolf's yellow eyes scanning the crowd. I was named the king in the North, Robb said, his voice clear. I swore to protect our people, to avenge my father. Now he stands among us. He has not asked for a crown. He only asks for your loyalty in the struggles that lie ahead. But I tell you this, the North is done bowing to false kings who murder the innocent and break faith. If my father wishes me to lay aside the crown, I will do it. But does he? Ned felt all eyes turn to him. The weight of it was enormous. He felt the presence of his ancestors, the echo of the old ways, the silent watch of the weirwoods. His chest tightened. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried, I have served as Warden of the North, as Hand of the King, as a loyal subject of the realm. Yet the realm I served has betrayed its own ideals. My daughter is hostage. My honor was shattered at the whim of a callow boy who calls himself king. Robert Baratheon was my friend, but his heir is a monster. The Lannisters think to frighten us with displays of force, but I tell you, the North remembers. We have not forgotten the injustices done to us. If the North wills that we stand as our own kingdom, I will not gainsay that. Nestorning. He placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. But I will not take the crown from my own son. Robb has led you to victory when all thought hope was lost. He has earned your loyalty as the king in the North. I will stand beside him and guide him as best I can. Let it be known. House Stark stands united. We claim independence for the North, and we shall forge our destiny together. Yet we do not hunger for unending war. If it can be peace, a fair peace that preserves our freedom, let us seek it. But should the Lannisters refuse, then we shall show them the North's fury. After Cargill, a great roar swept through the courtyard. Men thrust their fists into the air, cheering the king in the North, while also crying out Ned's name. The intensity of emotion battered Ned like a storm wind. He saw tears in some eyes, fervor in others. Robb's hand trembled slightly on the hilt of his sword, but he kept his face resolute. In that moment, Ned knew a new chapter of history was being written. The memory of icy gods wood knights whispered to him. The North was vast, proud, and it would endure as it had always endured. Yet the times were uncertain. The Lannisters would not accept this lightly. The Tyrells, the Baratheons loyal to Stannis or Renly, there were 1,000 shifting alliances beyond these walls. But here, in the courtyard of Riverrun, the men of the North and the Riverlands had found a common purpose. They hailed their king, and they honored Ned Stark's return. Catelyn moved to stand beside Ned, her presence a quiet comfort. He glanced at her, and she gave a small nod. They were in this together. Whatever came next, diplomacy, warfare, negotiations for hostages, would require all their will, all their cunning. Ned set his jaw, determined to spare Sansa from the Lannisters' clutches, to find Arya if she still wandered lost, and to preserve the lives of his people. If that meant forging a new kingdom in the North, so be it. Later, as dusk settled over Riverrun, Ned found himself standing on a parapet, overlooking the waters of the Tumblestone River. The sky glowed with the last vestiges of sunset, and the silhouettes of distant hills faded into twilight. His legs ached from the day's exertions, his mind from the swirl of conflict. The faint sound of men singing reached him, soldiers at their fires, exulting in the return of the Lord they had thought lost. Robb approached quietly, gray wind at his heels. "Father," he said, voice subdued, "I know you have reservations about all this. Do you believe we can truly be a free North? The Southern Lords will not yield easily, especially if they still believe we hold Jaime Lannister." Ned stared out at the darkening sky. "We will negotiate from strength, not from fear. They hold my daughter, so we must be careful. Jaime Lannister is our best bargaining chip, but if the Lannisters refuse to deal, then the cost of war will be terrible." Robb's hand found Grey Wind's neck, stroking the wolf's thick fur. "I'll not back down," he said, "unless you command it. But I know you wouldn't. I remember how you taught me that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. I've passed many sentences on the field. I've not run from the consequences. Now I'll not run from this." Then sorrow, pride and sorrow mingled in Ned's eyes. "You are my son, Robb. However this war ends, let us try to keep our honor intact. We are Starks." Robb nodded. They stood there in companionable silence, father and son, gazing over the water as the first stars emerged. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Making overtures to the Lannisters, sending out ravens to the Northern Lords, rallying men, preparing lines of defense. The line between king and father might blur, but Ned would do his duty. He had lived against all odds. The North had declared its independence in the face of tyranny. A long road stretched before them, a road fraught with perils. But for tonight, father and son stood side by side, unbroken. Ned remembered the moment at the Great Septi, when the sword had hovered over his neck. He breathed in the cool night air and whispered a silent prayer of thanks to the old gods. There was still a chance, fragile and precarious, that they could steer their own fate. If winter was coming, the North would stand tall beneath the direwolf banner, a realm unto itself, bound by family and ancient tradition. If the Iron Throne sought to break them again, they would discover a kingdom shaped by ice and tempered by honor. Even as Ned Stark's mind brimmed with worries. About Sansa, about Arya, about the chaos in King's Landing. His heart held a glimmer of hope. He was alive, and the North was rising. The wheel of fortune had turned, and though the realm might drown in blood before peace was found, he vowed to guide his people through the storm. For the North remembered, and the North endured. His voice, low and resolute, met the silent sky. "We stand together," he said. "We will not bend." In the growing darkness, Robb reached out and clasped his father's hand. Beyond them, the banners of the direwolf and the trout stirred in the evening breeze. Harbingers of a new order, the seeds of a kingdom that had found its courage. And though the night cloaked the world in shadow, a single star glimmered overhead, a distant beacon of light in the uncertain darkness to come. Aka, Janin Day. Night pressed thick against the walls of Riverrun, and the torches in the courtyard burned low. In the quiet hours, Ned Stark found himself in the great hall once more, long after most had taken to their bedrolls. He sat before the dying embers in the massive hearth, a single candle guttering on the table beside him, the wax forming runnels down its length. His hands were clasped in his lap, fingers restless as his thoughts wandered across the war-torn realm. He still wore his leathers, for he had been unable to sleep. Perhaps, he thought, he might never sleep easily again. The knowledge that Sansa languished under Joffrey's roof was like a sharpened blade at his heart. He prayed Arya was safe somewhere. Anywhere but the Red Keep. The memory of that moment in the courtyard, when the sword had hovered above his neck, returned to him often. A single chance intervention had spared his life and set them all on a new course. Now he sat in the hush of Riverrun, aware that men called his son king in the north. The realm had lurched in a direction Ned never imagined. If they could have foreseen all this in the days of Robert Baratheon's coronation, might it have been stopped? The door creaked, stirring Ned from his thoughts. He glimpsed the silhouette of Catelyn in the corridor's dim light. She came forward, her footfall soft against the flagstones. Her eyes looked tired, the remains of sorrow etched at their corners. He rose at once, stepping into the flicker of the hearth's glow. They embraced without words, a gentle entwinement of weary souls. He inhaled the faint scent of lavender in her hair. "You couldn't sleep," she said gently, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not pose it as a question. She knew him too well. He shook his head. "I'm haunted by the face of our daughter left behind," he admitted. "By all the choices we must now make. This war is bigger than any of us, and yet, it's in our hands to shape it. Robb's crown changes everything. I wonder if we can find a path to peace before the realm tears itself apart." "Now." Catelyn eased onto a bench near the hearth, motioning for him to join her. "We cannot change what has passed," she said. "But we can guide what comes next. I know Robb is resolute, but he's still so young." The men heed him because of his victories. They exalt him as their king, but war crowns many kings, and often topples them just as swiftly. He needs you now. Ned nodded heavily. "He has my counsel, always. Yet each time I see him, I see the boy he was just months ago, chasing Bran through the courtyard at Winterfell, wrestling in the snow. Now he carries the weight of thousands of lives, the hopes of 2 great regions. He has done well in battle, but it's the aftermath of battle that tests a ruler." Catelyn reached for his hand. "You will help him bear that weight. And if the gods are merciful, we'll find a way to bring Sansa home. And Arya." They fell silent then, listening to the crackle of the dying fire. Outside, a night bird called along the banks of the Tumblestone. The sound floated through the arrow slits in a lonely note. At length, Ned sighed and rose. "I'll try to rest," he said, touching the back of Catelyn's hand. "You should too. Dawn will bring new challenges." They parted with an exchange of weary smiles. As Ned made his way to the small room assigned him, his thoughts lingered on the vantage from the parapets earlier that evening. Even in darkness, the land felt fraught with menace, as though the ghosts of the war's dead roamed the fields. He thought of the small folk fleeing the Riverlands, leaving their burnt homes. Whichever side they had once supported, they all paid the price in one way or another. The heaviness of it followed him into his chamber. Morning came cloaked in cold mist off the river. The courtyard bustled with the clang of armor and the bray of horses as the new day's tasks began. Robb had called a war council to convene in a long hall near the stables, a practical space large enough to gather his bannermen and advisors. Ned arrived shortly after first light, the fog still drifting in pale ribbons across the yard. Robb stood at the head of a rough-hewn table, Grey Wind seated at his side, enormous paws splayed on the stone floor. Around him clustered a dozen men of note. The great John Umber, his thick beard wagging as he spoke in a booming voice. Roose Bolton, cold-eyed and silent. The Blackfish, Brynden Tully, leaning against a pillar with arms crossed over his breastplate. Several river lords flanked them, Mallister men, Bracken men, Blackwood men, each wearing the sigils of their houses. Their eyes flicked toward Ned as he entered. Muted respect mingled with curiosity. They were still adjusting to the idea that the father of their king was alive and had reclaimed his place among them. Robb raised his head. "Father," he said in a tone that blended formality with familial warmth. "We were about to discuss the latest reports from our outriders." Ned took his place next to Robb, nodding at the assembled. He noted Bolton's inscrutable expression. Lord Bolton had grown in prominence this war. His men were disciplined, known for their quiet efficiency. Ned had never trusted the man fully. But these days, any hint of dissent had to be managed carefully. One of the outriders, a young knight with mud-spattered boots, stepped forward to deliver his news. "My Lord King, Lord Stark," he said, inclining his head to both. "We rode north of the Red Fork, near the old crossing where the hills rise. We spotted Lannister foragers, a party of 100 or so, traveling under the banner of the Lion. They seemed to be scouting or gathering supplies. We kept our distance and circled around. Further east, closer to Harrenhal, we saw columns of smoke. Could be Tywin Lannister's host on the move, or another one of their detachments setting fire to villages." War. Robb's features tightened. "We cannot let them continue burning the Riverlands. These are our allies and our lands now. Have we men enough to cut off these scouting parties?" The Blackfish stepped away from the pillar. "We do, if we strike quickly and with precision. Tywin is regrouping near Harrenhal," it said, "with a large force. We cannot meet that entire army in open battle without reinforcements. But these foraging bands are vulnerable. They search for food, horses, anything to sustain their main host. We can bleed them, deny them supplies, and perhaps drive them into more reckless moves." "Go!" The great Jen pounded a fist on the table. "Yes. Send me, your grace. Let me hunt these curs. 100 Lannisters, 100 we can slay. Our men are spoiling for a good fight." Ned raised a cautionary hand. "Striking at these foragers is wise, but we must do so without exposing ourselves to traps. Tywin is cunning. A small victory can turn into a disaster if he uses it to lure us into an ambush. We must use outriders extensively, keep watch for reinforcements." "Mimic sure." Robb nodded. "Bolton, how many men can you spare for a quick strike?" Roose Bolton's eyes gleamed in the gray morning light. 300, my king. Light horse, archers, swift enough to close the distance before the Lannisters can call for help." Robb glanced to the Blackfish. "You'll go with them. I trust your judgment. Rendezvous with the outriders, approach under cover of night, and hit hard. Keep me informed." Brynden Tully inclined his head. "As you say, your grace." The great Joan's face fell somewhat, disappointed not to be leading the raid himself, but Robb shifted to him with an authoritative air. "Lord Umber, remain with the main force. There may be more Lannisters, or even Sellswords who try to test our lines. We need your strength here." That seemed to mollify him. The great John grunted and gave a curt nod, crossing his thick arms. Ned could see how deftly Robb was juggling personalities and responsibilities. It reassured him that his son had grown into a capable commander, despite the burdens of youth. They moved on to discuss supply lines and the possibility of forging an alliance with House Frey. Walder Frey's loyalties, as ever, were uncertain. He had allowed Robb to cross the twins in exchange for a betrothal promise that now hung awkwardly in the air. The old man would want something out of this war. He always did. Ned frowned at the mention of the Freys. He recalled crossing that bridge so many weeks ago, never expecting events to spiral like this. After the council dispersed, Ned lingered at the table, rolling up parchment maps. Robb dismissed the others and remained behind, Grey Wind pacing restlessly. The direwolf sniffed at Ned's hand, as though reacquainting himself with an old scent. When they were alone, Robb leaned on the table. "I keep thinking of Sansa," he said softly. "All these war plans, they're necessary. But I hate feeling as though we're leaving her to her fate." Ned set a hand on his son's shoulder. "I share your torment. Every day I wake with a knot in my gut, thinking of her. She's your sister and my daughter. Yet we must be cautious. The Lannisters will kill her if they suspect we have no intention of trading Jaime for her safety." "Bye." Robb's face hardened. "So we keep the Kingslayer alive in a gilded cage. I'd rather see him in the ground." "I understand." Ned's voice was quiet but firm. "We have to take the path that will free Sansa and keep the realm from drowning in blood. If Jaime can be exchanged or ransomed in some way, we must try. Vengeance is tempting, but we must think of our people." Robb exhaled, nodding slowly. "You're right, of course." His gaze flickered to gray wind. "I'll see him well guarded. He's lost none of his swagger. He sneers at us, saying we're boy kings and the north is a cold wasteland. Yet I notice he seldom tries that sneer when gray wind is near." Then Ned pictured Jaime Lannister in chains, the proud lion caught by the young wolf. A part of him felt a grim satisfaction. The Kingslayer had stood calmly while Joffrey had threatened Ned's head. The memory still stung. Yet duty overruled personal vengeance. They would keep the man alive, at least for now. That evening, Ned attended a modest feast in the Great Hall. It was not a joyous occasion, more a chance to feed the men's bellies with warm stew and fresh bread. Supply was uncertain, but the cooks had done their best, providing salted fish, a few roasted pigs, and turnips gleaned from nearby fields. Torches guttered along the walls, and minstrels plucked half-heartedly at strings, their tunes drowned out by the drone of tired men in conversation. Ned took a seat beside Catelyn at the high table. Robb was in the seat of honor, flanked by the Blackfish's vacant chair. Brynden Tully had already departed with Bolton's men on the raid. Edmure Tully, newly returned from overseeing repairs in the countryside, joined them. The younger Tully exuded an air of frustration, as though he wished for the war to be swift and decisive, but found it dragging on instead. Wine was poured, though not in great abundance. Most men preferred ale that night, in the hope of saving the finer drink for morale later on. Ned sipped sparingly, mindful of the counsel he would have with Robb afterward. His gaze drifted around the hall. He observed lords from lesser houses, men who once might have balked at sitting with the high lords, now sharing benches. War had forged strange fellowship. He felt a pang of memory for the days in Winterfell's hall, where he would sit at the dais with his family, the great hearth crackling. The dogs would roam beneath the tables, scrounging scraps. It had been a simpler life, though overshadowed by the threat of winter's approach. He did not think it would ever be simple again. Partway through the meal, Great John Umber rose, tankard in hand. "We have a toast to make," he boomed. His eyes swept the hall. "Lord Eddard Stark was taken from us, and then the old gods saw fit to return him. He's brought new hope to our cause. So here's to Ned Stark and to King Robb. May the two wolves of House Stark lead us to victory." The men roared their agreement, rattling cups. Ned felt heat in his cheeks, not entirely comfortable with such attention. Yet he raised his own cup in gratitude. Across from him, Robb tried to conceal a small, proud smile. Catelyn leaned in, speaking softly over the noise. "I wish Arya could see you now. See you both." She would be cheering with the loudest of them. Then Ned reached under the table, giving Catelyn's hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. "If the gods are good, she's out of that city and on her way north. And if they are not, then we must find her. I won't abandon her to the Lannisters." Eventually, the meal drew to a close. Men retired to bedrolls or to idle conversation in the corners. Ned and Robb stepped out into the night, the stars glimmering against a sky of deep velvet. The air carried a chill, and torches by the gate cast flickering shadows. Robb paused, letting a pair of guards pass, then spoke in a low voice. "Father, I plan to send a party to the twins in a few days. Walder Frey has demanded an update on the betrothal arrangement I promised him. I need to keep him appeased, at least until we know where we stand with the Lannisters. Ned's brow furrowed. You promised to wed one of his daughters, if I recall. The old man keeps a brood in that crossing like a spider with flies. He'll want that promise kept, or a better bargain. Robb's shoulders stiffened. I did. It was the price to cross. But so much has changed since then. If the North is truly independent, we must treat carefully with men like Walder Frey. I have half a mind to break the betrothal, but that would alienate him, or worse. Ned rested a hand lightly on Robb's arm. We can't afford to make more enemies. A slight against Walder Frey might push him to the Lannisters. Let us handle this matter with caution. Perhaps we offer him something in return, some concession that doesn't bind you in marriage if your heart cannot bear it. There might be other ways to secure the Freys' loyalty. Robb nodded grimly. I'll consider it. For now, I'll send an envoy. Someone shrewd who can reassure Lord Walder that we haven't forgotten our obligations. If you're willing, Father, your presence in such negotiations could lend weight. The old man might be more reasonable if he sees you alive and well. Ned considered. I'll do it if we find the right time. Right now, with Tywin's movements uncertain, you need me here. Once the Blackfish returns, I might go. Or if you must remain to consolidate the war effort, I can approach the twins with a suitable guard. No. They made their way along the courtyard's edge, passing small knots of men who saluted. At last, they parted ways, Robb striding back toward the keep, Ned lingering by the stables to clear his thoughts. He heard a soft whinny from within, the shuffle of hooves, the quiet talk of stable hands. The shapes of resting horses stood in the lantern's glow. One stable boy looked up, startled to see Ned. Ned nodded a brief greeting and turned away. The next day dawned bright but cold. Word arrived mid-morning that the Blackfish and Bolton's men had found and vanquished the Lannister foragers in the night, sending a handful fleeing. They took minimal losses and seized wagons of supplies. The success sparked a surge of confidence through Riverrun's encampment. But Ned cautioned the men not to grow complacent. Tywin's main force was still formidable, rumored to be massing near Harrenhal with thousands of soldiers. One raid would not win the war. Edmure Tully joined Ned at the ramparts overlooking the rushing water. The younger lord's face bore signs of fatigue and frustration. Lord Stark, he began. I wanted to speak with you about the devastation we're seeing throughout the Riverlands. My father is gone. My sister is your wife, and now I find myself effectively the Lord of Riverrun, though we are all rallying behind Robb. I know your cause is just, but I fear for my people. Every day, more come to our gates seeking refuge. Ned surveyed the waters. I understand your fear. War is cruel. Once we secure the region, we must see to these refugees, give them shelter, arrange for them to rebuild. The North has always tried to keep peace, but these are new times. My hope is that if we can bring the Lannisters to reason, we can halt the worst of this destruction. Sign. Edmure exhaled. My uncle, the Blackfish, told me I need to show more steel. He says the Lannisters will not be brought to reason easily, but we cannot keep letting them pillage these lands. Ned looked at the younger man with sympathy. We will keep fighting them in the field where we must, but there may come a time for negotiation, especially when we hold Jaime Lannister. That is our greatest advantage. Across the courtyard, men prepared horses for patrol. The scent of hay mingled with the crisp autumn air. Ned left Edmure and made his way toward the war room, a converted solar within Riverrun's thick walls. There, he found Robb conferring with Roose Bolton, who seemed as pale and as passionate as ever. They spoke of the next steps, the distribution of men for scouting. Bolton turned to Ned with a measured bow. Lord Stark, he said softly, it is good to see you return to us. My men are at your king's disposal. We have done our duty in the field. We shall do so again. Ned inclined his head, unsure how to read Bolton's cool gaze. I've heard of your success last night, my lord. The River Lords will be grateful for your swift action. Bolton's thin lips curved in a semblance of a smile. It was the Blackfish who led the strike. My men simply followed his command, but we are ready to follow King Robb wherever he leads. Robb nodded. Thank you, my lord. We'll need every sword in the days to come. He lifted a parchment from the table. I've drafted a message to King's Landing, addressed to the Queen Regent, Cersei Lannister. It states our terms for the release of Jaime Lannister, Sansa Stark returned unharmed, an immediate cessation of hostilities in the Riverlands, and a declaration of non-aggression toward the north. If they agree to that, we will open negotiations on further matters. My father and I plan to finalize this letter and send a raven within the day. Mansur. Bolton's brows inched upward. You truly think the Lannisters will heed such terms? You risk them simply stalling to buy time for Tywin. Robb's tone grew firm. If they stall or refuse, then we continue as we have. But we must try. Ned admired Robb's clarity of purpose. War was not always about winning every battle. Sometimes the letters one sent could be as crucial as the swords one drew. Yet a nagging worry tugged at Ned. Joffrey was a vengeful creature, more likely to sneer at these demands than to heed them. And what of Cersei's cunning? She might spin their request to her advantage somehow. Still, the attempt had to be made, for Sansa's sake at least. Later, Ned joined Robb in the Solar. Once Bolton had gone, they reviewed the contents of the message carefully, each word weighed. Outside the windows, the sun fell across the rippling river, casting bright shards of light on the stone. A scribe stood by to take down the final version, quill scratching on parchment. Robb signed it as Robb of House Stark, King in the North, Lord of Winterfell, while Ned added his own name as a witness, Eddard of House Stark, Lord of Winterfell, though that title was overshadowed now by Robb's kingship. Seeing the freshly inked words stirred a sense of unreality in Ned. Only months ago, he had been Hand of the King in King's Landing, striving to preserve a peace that was already crumbling. Now he was at war with the very throne he once served. The raven was dispatched before nightfall, carried by a trusted maester who promised to send it with the swiftest bird. The court at King's Landing would receive the message in a few days' time, if all went well. Whether or not they deigned to reply was another question. Ned tried not to dwell on worst-case scenarios. That Joffrey might fling the letter into the fireplace and have Sansa punished for their impudence. He would have to trust that the Lannisters wanted Jaime back badly enough to keep her alive. Still, he lay awake in the darkness that night, plagued by images of Sansa alone in the Red Keep, forced to bow to Joffrey's every whim. Morning broke with subdued rain. A damp chill pervaded the fortress as men went about their duties, water dripping from the battlements. Ned walked along the ramparts, the wet stone slick beneath his boots. Looking across the courtyard, he saw small gatherings of soldiers. Some from the north, some from the Riverlands, laughing or sharing stories as they waited for orders. Despite the gloom, there was a sense of camaraderie that heartened him. Men who once might have eyed each other with suspicion were bound by a common cause: loyalty to House Stark, loyalty to King Robb, and fury at the Lannisters who had savaged their lands. A horn sounded at the gate shortly after midday, echoing against the whetstone. Ned descended to the yard in time to see a small party of riders entering. Their cloaks were sodden with rain, their horses flecked with mud. At their head was the Blackfish, Brynden Tully, looking weary but triumphant. Behind him came a handful of riders bearing Bolton's sigil, carrying bundles of supplies captured from the Lannisters. The returning soldiers were greeted with cheers and shouts from onlookers, though the men themselves were subdued by the hardships they had endured. Robb emerged from within the keep, flanked by Grey Wind, who bounded forward and sniffed at the returning horses. The Blackfish dismounted with a groan, handing his reins to a stable hand. He nodded in greeting to Ned and Robb. We hit them harder than we thought, though a few stragglers escaped west. Tywin will know by now. We found no large host, but we suspect they're massing near Harrenhal. He paused, glancing at the men around him. Did we receive any word from King's Landing? Ned shook his head. Not yet. The raven was only sent yesterday. Brynden wiped water from his brow. Then we shall see if the Lannister Queen truly values her brother. For now, the men are exhausted, but morale is high. A victory, however small, emboldens them. Nams. Robb invited his uncle and the returning men into the hall for a warm meal, and Ned followed, noticing the quiet glances from the rank and file. Their eyes shone with new hope whenever they looked at him, as if his reappearance was some herald of the old god's favor. That weight of expectation lay heavy on his shoulders. He thought again of how easily the sword could have taken his head in King's Landing, how close the North had been to losing him forever. In the hall, the fire blazed, and the smell of stew and fresh bread filled the air. Men crowded around, offering the Blackfish questions and praise in equal measure. He bore it all with his customary gruffness, though Ned saw the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Perhaps he had long yearned to defend his homeland from the Lannisters, and now he had that chance. Eventually, the men left the Blackfish to his meal, and Robb beckoned him aside, with Ned following. They convened in a corner near the hearth. Robb asked about the strategic significance of the raid, the location of supply caches, and the condition of the roads. The Blackfish answered in terse details. The roads were poor, the farmland scorched, the villages deserted or razed. War had gouged a wound in the Riverlands. Ned listened quietly, absorbing the bleak picture. At length, the Blackfish turned to him. "You've seen the wars before, Lord Stark. Robert's rebellion. Was it always this brutal, this chaotic?" Ned's gaze went distant, recalling the smoke and blood of that earlier conflict. "War is always brutal," he said. "I remember the trident running red when Robert faced Rhaegar. But at least then, we had a clearer cause. Now it feels as though we're mired in a tangle of claims and counterclaims. Alliances and vendettas. When rightful justice is twisted, men suffer." "Men?" Brynden nodded. "Aye. And so they suffer again." They parted ways, and Ned sought a moment of solitude. He drifted outside despite the drizzle, finding the Godswood of Riverrun. It was smaller than Winterfell's, fewer trees, less space. But a single weirwood stood near a quiet pool, its red leaves drooping under the rain. Ned stepped beneath its boughs, letting the patter of droplets soothe him. He felt the old god's presence here, faint yet steady. Time slowed in that sanctuary. He knelt beside the pool, staring at his reflection. He looked older than before, lines etched deeper. But he was alive. He thought of the vow he had taken when he first learned Sansa was in danger. To do whatever necessary to keep his children safe, even if it meant calling himself a traitor. The wind stirred, ruffling the weirwood leaves. Rain trickled down Ned's face, mingling with a single tear he could not suppress. He thought of Arya, possibly lost in the wild or hidden among strangers. He imagined how frightened she must be, or how fierce her spirit might carry her through. He prayed to the old gods that Sansa would keep her composure, remain strong, and not be entirely broken by Joffrey's cruelty. The reflection in the pool shimmered as raindrops struck the surface, and Ned felt a shift in his chest, a resolve kindling. Whatever else happened, he would not abandon his children to fate. As twilight gathered, Ned returned to the keep, his cloak damp and his hair plastered to his temples. Catelyn waited by one of the hearths in a smaller chamber. A simple meal of bread and cheese set out for him. She offered a sad smile when he appeared. "You look as though you've walked half the battlements in this rain," she said. "I was beginning to worry." He shrugged out of his sodden cloak and took a seat, the warmth of the fire pleasant on his chilled skin. "I needed to clear my thoughts. There's so much to consider. Letters to the north, negotiations with the Freys, the approach of Tywin's army, and always the thought of Sansa." Catelyn lowered her eyes. "Some days, I feel my heart is in a vice. You're here, but the girls are scattered. Bran and Rickon are safe in Winterfell, but they must be frightened at all the news of war." Her voice trembled. "What if the Lannisters decide to march on the north when they've done with the Riverlands?" Ned reached across the small table, covering her hand with his own. "Maester Luwin will hold the castle. The people will rally to defend Winterfell if needed, but I pray it does not come to that. Tywin has enough trouble in the Riverlands, and with the possibility of Stannis or Renly claiming the Iron Throne. Or Rhaegas on multiple fronts. Men." Catelyn's grip tightened. "It feels as though the entire realm is being torn to pieces. All we can do is pick up the scraps." They lapsed into a subdued quiet, the crackling fire filling the room with flickering light. Ned was grateful for the companionship of his wife, the anchor she provided in this storm. He remembered how isolated he had felt in King's Landing, among the vipers of court, unsure whom to trust. Here at least he had the comfort of family. Robb was near, leading armies. Catelyn stood with him. Together, they would endure as Starks always had, though now under the banner of a newly risen kingdom in the north. When Ned stepped into the corridor, the castle was winding down for the evening. Lamps glowed in sconces, their reflections dancing on the damp stone floors. A messenger hurried past, nearly colliding with him. The young man bowed apologetically, then continued on, evidently bearing some urgent tidings. Ned's mind drifted to the possibility of a raven arriving from King's Landing, but no one had summoned him. Perhaps it was an internal message, or an update from the men riding patrol. He climbed to the chamber assigned to him, gazing out a narrow window at the rain-soaked courtyard below. Soldiers paced, their cloaks pulled tight, lanterns bobbing in the gloom. The fortress felt like a lonely island surrounded by the chaos of war. There would be no peace tonight, nor likely in the weeks to come. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by half-dreams of the Red Keep steps and the sharp rasp of steel. He heard Sansa's voice calling out for mercy. He saw Arya's face, fierce with anger, flickering in and out of shadow. He dreamt of Winterfell's courtyard buried in snow, Bran's laughter echoing in empty corridors. When he woke, dawn light crept through the shutters, a murky gray that signaled another dreary day. He rose at once, preparing himself for whatever lay ahead. By midday, the drizzle had subsided, leaving the air cool and the sky overcast. Ned walked the perimeter of the walls, exchanging words with the men on watch. The conversation turned inevitably to rumors of the Lannister host. Some said Tywin was mustering 10,000 men at Harrenhal. Others whispered that he had brought on foreign sellswords, savage and merciless. Ned weighed each rumor carefully. War thrived on exaggerations, but beneath the tall tales often lay a nugget of truth. Robb found him near the western battlements, gazing across farmland that stretched to the horizon. The younger Stark king looked resolute, though circles under his eyes betrayed his lack of rest. "Father," Robb said quietly, "we have a rider approaching from the south, alone, with a white flag. My men say it could be a messenger from the Lannisters." "Ma." Ned's pulse quickened. "Then we should meet them. Does the messenger come under truce?" "Aye, so it seems." Robb gestured for Ned to follow, and they descended to the courtyard, calling for horses. A handful of mounted guards joined them, along with Greyjohn Umber, who insisted on providing muscle in case it was a trick. The portcullis groaned open, and they rode out beyond the walls, traveling a short distance down the muddy road. The fields showed signs of recent battles, trampled crops, burned patches. A lone figure on horseback stood waiting, a white scrap of cloth tied to a short pole. The rider wore a hooded cloak, the horse shifting restlessly beneath them. The small party approached cautiously. At a gesture from Robb, the Greyjohn and a few others hung back, giving space for Ned and Robb to parley. As they neared, the messenger lifted a hand in greeting. Rain dripped from the edge of the hood. Ned studied the figure. A slight frame, but the face remained hidden. The messenger's voice was quiet but firm. "I come with word from Her Grace, the Queen Regent Cersei Lannister, in reply to your letter." The figure reached into a pouch and withdrew a parchment sealed with the crimson wax of House Lannister. Robb's jaw tightened, but his tone remained calm. "You've risked traveling alone through these lands. You must have something important to share." The messenger nodded. "Her Grace bids me read the response aloud, then provide you with the seal as proof of authenticity." Ned exchanged a glance with Robb. "Very well," said Ned. "Read." The messenger broke the seal, unrolled the parchment carefully, and began to read in a voice that carried over the damp fields. "To Robb Stark, styling himself king in the north, and to Eddard Stark, traitor to the Iron Throne." At those words Ned felt a flicker of anger, but he held his tongue. The messenger continued, "The crown acknowledges the captivity of our beloved brother, Sir Jaime Lannister, and the demands you have laid forth. We reject these demands on the grounds of treason and rebellion. We hold Sansa Stark as a hostage of good faith, but we will not be extorted. Should any harm come to Jaime Lannister, we will visit the same upon Sansa Stark. Moreover, we demand your unconditional surrender, and the dissolution of your rebellious claim to the north. Should you comply, Lord Eddard Stark will be granted a royal pardon, and your daughter Sansa will be returned safely. Defy us, and she will answer for your treason with her life. Signed, Cersei of House Lannister, Queen Regent of the Seven Kingdoms. Then, a hush fell, broken only by the distant dripping of water from the eaves of a ruined barn. Ned forced himself to breathe evenly, though rage churned within. They dared to name him traitor after the false confession they had wrung from him in King's Landing. Robb's eyes narrowed, a muscle in his jaw twitching. The messenger folded the parchment and held it out. Ned reached for it, glancing at the bold signature and the red wax. The threat was plain as day: yield or Sansa dies. He wanted to tear the parchment to shreds. Instead, he slid it into his cloak. "Tell your queen," he said quietly, "that we value Sansa Stark's life above all, but we will not kneel to Joffrey Baratheon, nor will we abandon our rightful independence. We hold Jaime Lannister as our prisoner, and if any harm befalls my daughter, her brother will pay in kind." The messenger inclined her head. "I understand, but be warned. This letter was not a mere bluff. The Queen will do as she says. I have instructions to depart at once with any reply you see fit to entrust me." Robb glanced at Ned. Fury and worry shone in the young king's eyes. "Our reply stands," Robb said, voice hoarse. "We will not yield." The messenger gave a final nod, turned their horse, and cantered away southward across the muddy fields, the white fluttering. The small party watched them go, tension coiling in the air. At last, the Greyjohn spoke in a rumble. "We should chase them down, feed their bones to the crows, send a message of our own." Ned shook his head. "No, we sent our words. Let the messenger return. If we kill every herald, we abandon all hope of negotiation. That might cost Sansa her life." Robb's hands trembled on his reins. "They've left us no real choice," he muttered. "They're threatening Sansa. If we carry on with the war, they'll use her to punish us. If we surrender, they'll name me a traitor anyway. And we lose everything we fought for. Everything the North demands." Ned felt his heart tighten like a clenched fist. He understood the agony in Robb's voice. It was the same torment that plagued Ned's own mind. "We will find a way," he said, summoning whatever calm he could muster. "We have Jaime. They threaten Sansa, we threaten Jaime. For now, it keeps her alive. We must be swift and sure in our next steps. If there is a chink in the Lannisters' armor, we'll find it." They turned their horses back toward Riverrun, water splashing around the hooves. Ned replayed the messenger's words in his mind. The Queen's cold ultimatum rang again and again in his ears, stoking both fury and dread. The sky above offered no solace, just a uniform stretch of gray. It felt as though all the gods had abandoned the realm to the cruel devices of mortals. At the gates of Riverrun, the guards let them pass. Inside the courtyard, men hurried to meet them, seeking news. Ned slid from his horse, ignoring the ache in his muscles. He and Robb strode into the keep with grim purpose, summoning their trusted lords to hear the Lannisters' response. Another war council would be held, tensions higher than ever. The war had already been cruel, but with the Queen Regent's letter, it threatened to become an even darker affair, where hostages might lose their lives in place of soldiers. As men gathered, the hall filled with angry mutterings. The Great John told them of the letter, emphasizing the Lannisters' vile threat. Robb and Ned stood at the center, bracing themselves for the outcry. It came swiftly, a chorus of shouts denouncing the Lannisters as cowards, calling for swift vengeance. Some demanded that Jaime be dragged forth in chains and sent back in pieces. Others urged caution, that Sansa's life hung in the balance. The bickering rose in pitch until Robb slammed his hand on the table, commanding silence. Ned took a measured breath, stepping forward. "We will not be goaded into rashness that might cost my daughter her life. We hold Jaime Lannister. He is our surety. If they kill Sansa, we kill him, and they know it. For the moment, that keeps her breathing. But we must not mistake that for true security. The Lannisters might decide that losing Jaime is worth punishing us. Roose Bolton spoke in a silky tone, cutting through the murmur. In that case, we must apply the pressure. Make King's Landing fear us. Let them know that if Sansa dies, they lose Jaime and more. We can strike deeper into the Crown Lands, put King's Landing in peril. The Great John was quick to roar approval. Ay, make them tremble at our approach. But Ned recalled the complexities of the realm, how the Crown might call upon other alliances. The Crownlands are well protected, he cautioned. The gold cloaks and the Red Keep's defenses, plus any banners the Queen can muster. Marching on King's Landing will require a massive host, one we might not have unless all the River Lords join us unreservedly. Stannis Baratheon lurks somewhere in the east, with his own claim to the throne. Renly Baratheon, too, was rumored to have crowned himself in Highgarden's domain. The realm is fracturing. Robb placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. Grey wind prowled behind him, tail swishing in agitation. We remain the North, standing apart from their quarrels for the Iron Throne. But it seems all roads lead to conflict with the Lannisters. I will not bend the knee to a false king who holds my sister captive. A hush settled, and men studied Robb's face. He looked every inch a young monarch, determined and unyielding. Yet Ned saw the flicker of pain beneath his resolve. This was no trifling matter of honor, but family. Finally, Robb inhaled slowly. We hold Jaime Lannister. We hold the strength of the North. We are not without allies. Let the Queen see that her threats will not break us. I will dispatch riders to gather more information. Let us see what Tywin does next. If the moment comes for a true confrontation, we will meet him in the field. Benedictor. Ned spoke softly after his son. All the while, we keep the lines of negotiation open, however small. We must not let them think us inflexible, or they might decide to cut their losses and harm Sansa. We walk a narrow bridge, my lords. Some nodded in reluctant agreement. The tension in the hall remained palpable. Men were angry, hungry for justice. They wanted to see the Lannisters pay, but the threat to Sansa weighed on them as well. Outside, thunder rumbled, though whether it signaled a distant storm or the echo of restless gods, none could say. The council ended with no easy resolutions. Men departed in clumps, muttering and gesturing. Orders were given to strengthen the walls, to ensure that any surprise attack from Tywin's direction would be met with a firm defense. Scouts were dispatched, ravens readied. The fortress stirred with renewed urgency. Ned stood near the doorway, looking up at the vaulted ceiling. He recalled the old godswood again, the hush beneath the weirwood's branches. He wished he could remain there, away from all these burdens. But a king's father did not have the luxury of retreat, not when lives were at stake. He stepped into a corridor lit by flickering torches, the air close and smelling of damp stone. Robb joined him, walking at his side. They spoke quietly of the day's developments, of what the Lannisters' next move might be. Passing servants lowered their heads respectfully. When they reached the keep's central stairs, Robb turned, placing a hand on Ned's shoulder. "Father," he said, voice subdued, "I know we're doing all we can, but each day that passes with Sansa in their clutches, I can hardly bear it." Ned met his son's troubled gaze. He remembered Robb as a little boy, perched on his knee, learning the stark words, "Winter is coming." Back then, those words were a warning of cold and hardship. Now they felt like an omen for the entire realm's ruin. "I know," Ned replied gently, "but we must keep faith. She is strong in her own way, and as long as Jaime remains alive, she has value to them. They won't kill her lightly, or they would have done so already. We'll seize any chance to free her." Robb nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. The burdens of kingship pressed on him without mercy. He was wise enough to heed counsel, strong enough to lead armies. But in matters of the heart, such as Sansa's plight, there was only so much strategy could accomplish. Together, They mounted the stairs, each step echoing with the weight of the war behind them. That night, Ned once again found Catelyn in a quiet room, waiting by a lantern's glow. She had placed a simple meal of dried fruit and cheese on a table. His appetite was meager, his spirit heavy. She read his face and understood. She rose, touching his arm. "The letter from the Lannisters is as we feared." He nodded, setting aside his cloak. "They threaten to kill Sansa if we don't surrender. But we won't surrender, so the stalemate continues." Catelyn's jaw tightened. How did it come to this? House Stark was once at peace with the throne. You went south to help Robert, and now, this. Her eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "We have to be strong for the boys, for the realm. But sometimes I can't believe how quickly it all fell apart." Ned drew her into his arms, holding her close. "We'll find a way," he whispered. "We have to. Our family depends on it. The North depends on it. We stand on our own now. And I will not let them hurt our children." They stood in silence, each taking what comfort they could from the other's presence. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning through the towers. The fortress was full of watchful men, yet Ned felt the fragility of their position, the precarious nature of a kingdom newly declared. The Lannisters were cunning, ruthless. But House Stark too was forged in hardship, born of ancient line and unyielding will. If the Queen Regent thought to subdue them through threats alone, she would soon learn the truth. The North remembers its debts and pays them in kind. A crack of thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the hills. Ned held Catelyn, listening to the faint roll of it, feeling the tension in the air. A storm was brewing, both in the sky and in the realm. Tomorrow, they would marshal their plans, brace for the next blow. The war had only begun, and already the cost was immeasurable. Still, an ember of hope persisted, fueled by the knowledge that father and son stood united, that the North was not alone, that the bonds of blood and honor might yet endure against the ambitions of a false king and a cunning queen. When Ned at last released Catelyn, he looked into her eyes and tried to summon a reassuring smile. "We'll outlast the storm," he said softly. "We have no other choice." And in the gloom of that tower, as wind and thunder rattled the stones, they drew upon the shared strength of a house that had endured centuries of winter. A family bound by loyalty, determined to see the dawn of a new day. Day broke beneath a dome of swirling gray clouds, the remnants of the previous night's storm still clinging to the air. The banners atop Riverrun's ramparts drooped, heavy with moisture, and a few stray crows wheeled in the sky above. Within the keep, men stirred to life, shaking off uneasy dreams of war and hostages. A hush hung over the corridors, as though the fortress itself was bracing for another day of tense decisions. Eddard Stark stood at the narrow window of his chamber, gazing down into the courtyard where soldiers began their tasks. Some harnessed horses to wagons, others fletched arrows near the forge, their expressions grim. He could almost taste the worry in the air. The letter from the Lannisters had left everyone on edge. Cersei demanded they renounce their newly claimed crown, threatened Sansa if they refused. It was a cold ultimatum, one that gave them no real way forward except to stand firm and hope their hostage, Jaime, kept Sansa alive. He pressed a hand against the cold stone sill, recalling the taste of fear he had known in King's Landing. In so many ways, his family's fate lay in the hands of ruthless enemies. Yet the North had risen, and that was not a thing easily undone. Turning from the window, he splashed water on his face from a brass basin. Sleep still clung to his eyes. Memories of the previous night haunted him. Thunder rolling in the distance, Catelyn's quiet tears, the flicker of torches in the corridor. He dressed quickly in plain leathers and a woolen doublet. As he tugged on his boots, he tried to form a plan, some faint glimmer of strategy that might preserve Sansa and keep the North free. But no simple solution emerged. The day would have to begin, as all the rest had, with uncertain steps. When he left his chamber, he nearly ran to a young man hurrying past, a scroll clenched in his hand. The fellow bowed hastily. "My lord," he murmured, "I was sent to find you. King Robb asks you to join him in the council room at once." Ned nodded, feeling a pang of concern. Has news arrived? The messenger hesitated. A rider from the Freys, he replied. He reached our gates just as dawn broke. That's all I know. Ned thanked him and hurried along the corridor. The fortress felt oppressively silent, the hush broken by distant echoes of men's voices. He thought back to the dire predicament of the Frey alliance. Robb had promised to wed a Frey daughter for the crossing of the twins. Now that Robb was hailed as king in the north, and betrothed in a way to war itself, he faced a web of obligations, and Walder Frey was not a man to be trifled with. Ned wondered if the old lord had heard about Ned's survival. Likely so. The realm was abuzz with rumors. But what would Frey demand now? He made his way to the war council room, a broad chamber with windows overlooking the river. Robb was already there, standing behind the massive oak table covered in maps and scattered parchment. A gloom shadowed his brow, and gray wind lay at his feet, ears alert. Gathered around were several lords: Great John Umber, Roose Bolton, Edmure Tully, and a few of the river lords. Catelyn stood near Robb, arms folded. She offered Ned a small taut smile as he entered. Robb lifted his head. "Father," he said, "we have a visitor from the twins." A man in Frey colors stood to one side. He was middle-aged, lean, with a face that looked perpetually sour. His hair was salt and pepper, cropped close above his ears. He bowed stiffly to Ned, acknowledging his presence. "My Lord Stark," he greeted and turned back to Robb. "Your Grace, I bring a message from Lord Walder Frey. He has heard troubling accounts that you might be reconsidering your betrothal pledge. He wishes to remind you of the price paid for your passage across the twins. Without his forbearance, you would not have been able to move your army south as you did. Lord Walder expects your oath to be upheld." Robb tensed. "I have not forgotten the oath," he said, measured. "I promised to wed one of Lord Walder's daughters. But this war has changed much, as you can plainly see. I'm no longer merely Robb Stark, but the king in the north. My obligations have multiplied, and I must consider the needs of my kingdom." Ender Ensaway. The Frey messenger's lips pressed into a thin line. "Lord Walder is aware of your new station, my king. He sends word that if you choose to break faith, he will not stand idle. You must wed his daughter as promised, or present an alternative that satisfies him. If not, he threatens to bar his gates to your men, or worse. Ully with House Lannister." A cold ripple went through the gathered lords. The Great John gave a low rumble of displeasure, gripping the hilt of his sword. "The old weasel dares to threaten us now, after we've already crossed his damned bridge." Men asked. Ned raised a hand, cautioning calm. "We should not dismiss the twins' importance," he said. "If Walder Frey seals his cause to the Lannisters, it opens another front. Tywin might find quick passage north of the Trident. The Freys are vital in controlling that crossing. We can't afford to make them our enemy." Robb's knuckles flexed. "I gave that promise when I believed my father was dead, when I believed time was short and necessity great." He looked at Ned, eyes filled with frustration. "But father, I cannot bind myself to a Frey daughter if that union might hamper our ability to negotiate with others. As king in the north, I may be expected to wed a lady from one of the major houses to secure a broader alliance." Catelyn spoke up, her tone pragmatic. "We must consider the North's future. If you are truly a king, your marriage is not merely a private matter, but a matter of state." Still, Walder Frey's cooperation was crucial. We owe him some debt, or at least the courtesy of negotiation. Roose Bolton's pale eyes flicked from face to face. "It would be foolish to let the Freys open the way for Tywin Lannister to cross behind us. The crossing must remain neutral or in our favor. Are there any suitable matches within your house or your allies, aside from Robb, that might appease Lord Frey?" At this, Edmure Tully shook his head. "I am unwed, but I doubt Lord Walder would accept me in Robb's stead. He wants the prestige of tying his line to the king in the north. Anything less might be taken as an insult." A murmur spread through the room. Walder Frey's pride was legendary, as was his ability to harbor grudges. Ned feared a misstep would turn the old man's petty wrath into a strategic nightmare. He stepped forward, addressing the messenger directly. "Tell Lord Walder that King Robb Stark has not forgotten his promise, nor does he intend to insult House Frey. We ask for a period of grace while this war unfolds. Once the threat of the Lannisters is settled, one way or another, we can confirm the betrothal or arrange a new agreement beneficial to both sides." The Frey emissaries' brows knit by Tywin. And how long would such a grace period last? Lord Walder will want specifics. He grows impatient. He sees the realm in chaos and wonders if you mean to push him aside now that you have no need of his bridge. Nani? Robb took a breath, clearly struggling to keep his temper. We do still need his bridge. The war is not over. Tywin might threaten us from the south or the east or some other direction. The crossing at the Twins remains vital. Your lord should know this. I will not renege on my oath without cause. But I ask for at least until the next turn of the moon to settle these matters. We face the Lannister host, and we have a hostage crisis involving my sister. The entire war hinges on that. Let Lord Walder show some patience. Son. Catelyn's gaze flitted to Ned, searching for his reaction. He gave a small nod of agreement. This was as fair an offer as they could manage for the time being. Breaking with Walder Frey outright would be madness. But Robb could not simply rush into a marriage with a Frey daughter at such a precarious moment. The Frey messenger pursed his lips. "I will bear your words, your grace. But do not be surprised if Lord Walder demands guarantees, perhaps a hostage of his own to ensure your oath. One of your highborn kin." The Great John let out a fierce growl. "Hostage? We hold the Kingslayer himself, and your craven lord demands a hostage from us." Robb lifted a staying hand before Umber could go on. "We shall see what Lord Walder requests," Robb said. Voice clipped. "For now, you have my answer. Bring it to him faithfully. You have leave to rest in Riverrun before your return." The messenger nodded stiffly, retreating toward the door. Guards escorted him out. Once he was gone, the room seemed to exhale. Great John slammed a hand on the table. "We beset on all sides by threats and demands. First the Lannisters, now the Freys. Next, the Tyrells might come knocking. We can't keep dancing to every southern tune." Ned pressed his lips thin. "Yet we must handle these matters with care. War is not fought solely on the battlefield. One alliance mismanaged and the entire edifice collapses." Bolton's smooth voice slid into the discussion. "We might consider sending a small retinue to the Twins now, to speak face-to-face with Walder Frey. Reassure him, flatter him, promise him that we value his friendship. That might buy us time without committing King Robb to something irrevocable." There, a low murmur of agreement spread among some of the river lords. Edmure Tully said, "I'll go if you wish, Robb. I grew up meeting the Freys, though I can't say any of us took pleasure in their company. Still, I know some of them by name. My presence might lend some weight." Robb nodded, glancing at Ned. "I trust my uncle in such matters, but I also trust you, father. Yet we need your presence here to deal with Tywin and the situation with Sansa. Perhaps Uncle Edmure is best suited to handle Walder Frey for now." "Nay." Ned weighed the idea, then said, "It's wise to split our efforts. We'll need an envoy, strong enough to show respect, but not so large as to alarm Frey or leave us weak here. Edmure, if you handle the negotiations, do so carefully. Lord Walder is cunning. Remember that." Edmure gave a grim smile. "I'll bring a few men who know how to bite their tongues. We can set out in 2 days. The roads are passable enough if the rain holds off." Satisfied with that plan, Robb dismissed the council, and the men trickled out. Bolton lingered a moment, his pale eyes drifting across the map-littered table. Then, with a polite bow, he too departed. Ned watched him go, still unsettled by the man's inscrutable demeanor. War forged unlikely allies, and Bolton was more of a tool than a friend. Yet the tool might prove necessary in the battles ahead. Catelyn approached Ned, her voice low. "There's a gloom over Robb I can't dispel. I know the burden he carries. Perhaps you should walk with him in the Godswood, or speak with him alone. He respects your counsel as both father and advisor, but he hardly rests. His nightmares wake him. And we can't lose him to fear or exhaustion. Ned touched her cheek lightly, feeling the warmth of her skin. I'll speak to him. He's still my son, no matter if half the realm calls him king. She squeezed his hand, then made her way out, presumably to see to some of the wounded men who still recovered from earlier skirmishes. Ned left the council room and headed toward Robb's private solar, expecting to find him there. But Robb was absent. A passing guard said the king had gone down to the courtyard, perhaps to inspect the men. The day had grown a shade brighter by the time Ned reached the yard. Clouds still veiled the sun, but the rain had stopped, leaving puddles on the cobblestones. Robb stood beneath one of the gate towers, gray wind beside him, as a group of archers demonstrated how they repaired bowstrings. His posture was rigid, arms crossed. When Ned neared, Robb thanked the archers and sent them back to their practice. "Father," Robb said softly. The tension in his voice was apparent. Gray wind sniffed at Ned's boots, then looked away toward a patch of soggy grass. Ned nodded a greeting. "Your mother worries for you," he said, without preamble. "She says you hardly sleep." Robb's jaw tightened. "I close my eyes, and I see Sansa in a tower cell, or forced to stand in that cursed throne room before Joffrey. I see the letter again and again, Cersei's threat. I wonder if Jaime is truly enough to keep Sansa alive. I wonder if we should do more, do something reckless. But I know that might only doom her." Ned placed a hand on Robb's shoulder. "I understand. Every moment of my captivity in King's Landing, I imagined my own children. Sansa was there, Arya missing. The pain of not knowing is terrible." He exhaled. "Our best chance remains what we are doing. Hold Jaime, build our strength, push the Lannisters to bargain. If we lash out blindly, we might lose everything." Robb looked away, eyes dark with frustration. "I keep hearing men say I'm their king, that they'll follow me wherever I lead. But in truth, I feel bound by the Lannisters' threats. Is that the mark of a king, that I can't even rescue my sister for fear of harming her?" "It's the mark of a father or a brother," Ned said gently. "Those who care about people are always bound in some way. A king might choose total ruthlessness, but that path leads to ruin of the soul. You are forging a different kind of kingship, one of honor." "Nirati." Robb's gaze flicked back. There was a sheen in his eyes that he refused to let turn into tears. "Honor," he echoed softly. "We'll see if it's enough." They walked a slow circuit around the courtyard, boots splashing in shallow puddles. Gray wind trailed them, occasionally trotting off to sniff at something interesting. Men parted before them, offering curt bows. Ned recognized that for the soldiers, this was a symbol. The king in the north walking side by side with his father, the long-lost lord. The sight seemed to give them confidence. As they passed a group of pikemen, Ned noticed one who looked up in unabashed awe. A whispered comment followed Ned's wake. "He's alive. That's him, truly." It reminded him how improbable his presence was after the events in King's Landing. Perhaps that improbability lent an almost legendary quality to his survival, and to the cause for which they all fought. They paused at the stables, where a stable hand was brushing a brown gelding. Robb idly ran a hand down the horse's flank. "I'm sending out another patrol," he said. "We need to watch the roads, see if Tywin is on the move from Harrenhal. If he marches west, he could loop around and trap us here. If he marches south, maybe he intends to handle some threat from Renly or Stannis. We have no word yet on the Baratheon's next moves." Ned nodded, mind flicking through the complexities. "Do you want me to speak with Bolton about leading a small force to scout more closely?" He mentioned infiltration around Harrenhal. "No." Robb hesitated. "Perhaps. Or we could send the Blackfish. He's more trustworthy. Bolton unnerves me at times. His men are too quiet." Ned couldn't disagree. The Blackfish is still occupied with securing the border villages. He just returned from that raid on the foragers, and he may want a moment's rest. But if he's willing, yes, he'd be the better choice. They started back toward the keep. The day wore on, and Ned felt that intangible weight pressing down again. So many decisions, each one a potential pivot in the war. He had once longed to return north from King's Landing, away from court intrigues. Now, ironically, the court intrigues had followed him here, joined by the hammer of war. Inside, they discovered that a small crowd of soldiers had gathered near the Great Hall. Voices rose in agitation. Ned and Robb shared a glance, then pushed through the onlookers. At the center stood two men, one wearing the black and gray of House Bolton, another in the patched leathers of a huntsman from the Riverlands. They were in a heated argument. "You stole that chest of coin from my tent, you bastard," the huntsman spat, jabbing a finger at the Bolton man. "I saw you sneaking around after dark." The Bolton soldier sneered, a hand on his dagger. "Mind your tongue. I've been guarding the perimeter. I've no need of your paltry coin." Grey Wind let out a low growl, causing both men to wheel around. When they saw Robb and Ned, their anger turned to instant wariness. The crowd parted. Robb stepped forward, voice stern. "What's this commotion?" The huntsman dipped his head quickly. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon. My money was taken. Only a pittance, but it was all I had." This man was lurking nearby. "I accused him, perhaps hastily, but I know what I saw." "Inside, hey." The Bolton man drew himself up stiffly. "I lurk nowhere. I was on sentry. I take no coin from squatters or beggars. He slanders me." Robb surveyed them both, tension brimming. "We have enough enemies without feuding among ourselves. If coin is missing, we'll see to it. But I'll not have the men brawling and flinging accusations at random." He motioned to a few guards. "Speak to each man's comrades. Find out who was where. If you find evidence of theft, bring it to me. Until then, keep the peace." "New Etre." Disgruntled, the two men stood down, each muttering. Ned eyed them carefully. War camps often bred suspicion and resentment. With so many different houses forced together, friction was inevitable. Worse, House Bolton had a certain reputation that made others uneasy. The crowd began to disperse, though hushed whispers lingered. Ned laid a hand on Robb's arm. "This is the sort of quarrel that can fester if we're not careful. Division within the camp could be disastrous." Robb's mouth set in a grim line. "A king must judge disputes," the old songs say. But they never mention how tedious and ugly it can be. "I'll handle it, father, or at least do my best." They continued on into the Great Hall, which served as a kind of central gathering space in these days of war. A few servants rushed by, carrying trays of bread or pitchers of watered wine. Some wounded men sat at the edges of the hall, their bandages freshly changed, trying to eat while ignoring the pain in their limbs. Ned felt a pang of sympathy. These men gave their blood for the North's independence, yet all many of them desired was a roof and a safe home. Caitlin approached them, beckoning. "There's someone new at the gate," she said, voice hushed. "A woman traveling with a cart. She claims to be a peddler, but the guards say she asked specifically for the Wolf King and his father. That seems strange." Robb's brow rose. "A Lannister spy, perhaps?" Ned frowned. "Or someone with a message they dare not reveal publicly." Caitlin looked over her shoulder. "She waits in the yard, guarded. I thought it best if you decided how to proceed." "You." Robb exchanged a glance with Ned. "We'll speak to her. No sense letting a potential spy roam free." They followed Caitlin back out into the open air. Near the gate, flanked by two armed guards, stood a slight woman in a faded cloak. A donkey cart piled with wooden boxes and sacks of herbs sat behind her. She had dark, curling hair streaked with silver at the temples. Her face was lined, though her eyes flickered with sharp intelligence. She dipped a curtsy when Robb and Ned approached. "Your Grace, my Lord Stark," she said in a calm voice. "I am Sarah, a traveling peddler. I bring medicines, potions, and good luck charms, if you'll have them." Robb's expression was cautious. "The guards say you asked for me by name. Why?" The woman inclined her head. "Word spreads along the roads, my king. We hear tales of the boy wolf and his father, Ned Stark, returned from the grave. I wish to see it with my own eyes. Also, I carry something that might be of service to you." She patted the donkey's flank. "Remedies for arrow wounds, a balm for fevers. Soldiers need such things. I hope to trade. Ned studied her. Many peddlers come through war-torn lands, but few are so direct. Do you have information for us? Or do you only wish to sell your wares? Her eyes flicked around, cautious of the guards listening in. I may have gleaned a few rumors on the road, she allowed. If you'd like, I'll share them. In exchange, I only ask the safety of your camp and fair coin for my remedies. Robb considered. We'll search your cart for hidden weapons or messages. If all is well, you can set up near the stables for the day. But any rumor you carry, we want to hear. She nodded, solemnly. Understood, Your Grace. I'll not cause trouble. Robb gestured to the guards, who began rifling through the cart. They lifted wooden boxes, rummaged through sacks of dried herbs that released pungent scents. No sign of a hidden crossbow or clandestine scroll appeared. When they were satisfied, Robb waved them back. Let her open shop, he said. But keep an eye on her. I'll speak with her later. Caitlin touched Ned's arm as the woman led her donkey toward a corner of the courtyard. Our men do need better supplies, she murmured. Maester Vyman tries to stretch our stock, but we're running low on salves and bandages. Perhaps this is a stroke of fortune. Ned nodded, still watching the peddler carefully. He had learned the hard way to trust few. But it was true that armies needed more than swords to continue fighting. They needed healing and hope. As midday approached, Ned retired briefly to the war room to comb over new reports from scouts. Each scrap of news carried implications. One claimed that Tywin's host was stirring at Harrenhal, though it remained unclear if he would march east or west. Another rumor suggested King's Landing had sent envoys to Dorne, seeking an alliance. That stirred Ned's memory of the Martells, who had long nursed hatred for the Lannisters after Elia Martell's fate in the sack of King's Landing years ago. What might they do now? The swirl of possibility made Ned's head throb. He rubbed his temple, his thoughts drifting inevitably to Sansa Dao. The Red Keep was a nest of vipers. If the Lannisters formed a stronger alliance with Dorne, or with the Tyrells, it could change the balance. He wondered if the Queen Regent had begun to sense the precariousness of her position. Perhaps not. Joffrey's arrogance was unbounded, and so long as Tywin commanded large armies, they might feel secure. There was a soft knock at the door. Robb entered, face taut with something between curiosity and concern. That peddler, Sarah. She says she has news she wants to deliver privately. I'm not sure if she's spinning a tale for more coin or if she truly knows something worth hearing. I thought you might want to be there. Ned rose, leaving the reports behind. They found Sarah in a small alcove near the kitchens, where she had set her wares on a rough wooden table. Tiny vials of colored liquid, pouches of herbs, small carved amulets. The aroma was sharp, mint, rosemary, something else Ned couldn't name. One of Robb's guards stood watch with a bored expression, but he stiffened as the king and Ned approached. Sarah dipped her head again, motioning for them to come closer. I beg your pardon for my secrecy, but I thought you'd want fewer ears on this. Robb folded his arms. Speak plainly then. She glanced at Ned, then back to Robb. I came by way of a small hamlet south of here, near the Willowwood. I crossed paths with a band of Sellswords, perhaps a dozen. They flew no banner but carried themselves like Lannister men. If you catch my meaning, I overheard them say they were heading north under instructions to find a key fortress near the Red Fork. Could be a rumor, but they mentioned infiltration. Planting themselves in a garrison to Ned felt a prickle of alarm. Infiltration of which fortress? She shrugged, spreading her hands. They didn't say the name, or perhaps I didn't hear. But they spoke confidently of blending in with the defenders, then betraying them from within. I thought it might matter to you. Robb looked to Ned. It could be any castle along the Red Fork, a Corn Hall, maybe Seaguard, or even Riverrun itself. Sarah nodded. If you have a mole, or you accept unknown Sellswords into your ranks, you could be undone. War is a game of hidden moves, as they say. Ned studied the woman. Why tell us this? She pursed her lips. This realm is in chaos. If I were on one side, I might avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Besides, I've no love for the Lannisters. Word around the roads is that they're burning villages, raping and pillaging. I'm just an old peddler, but I prefer not to see the world swallowed by their greed. Or Rob considered her for a long moment. We appreciate the warning. He reached into his belt pouch, removing a small coin. He pressed it into her palm. For your trouble. Stay the night. Sell your wares. Then, go where you will. But if you learn more, I'd welcome any further news. None. She accepted the coin with a polite dip of the head. You're generous, my king. May the old gods and the new watch over you. Outside, the gray daylight seemed to mock them. Ned glanced up at the sky. We need to bolster our watchfulness. No unknown sellsword bands should be admitted to Riverrun or any allied stronghold without thorough scrutiny. Rob nodded grimly. I'll spread the word to our outposts. They'll check all newcomers. We can't let Tywin slip a dagger into our back while we focus on the front. In the days that followed, the threat of infiltration gnawed at the edges of everyone's minds. Patrols were doubled. Any travelers or refugees seeking entry were questioned. Great John Umber led some of those interrogations personally, his booming voice echoing across the yard. A few men were turned away, grumbling that they only wanted shelter or a meal. But Rob would not risk it, especially after the cryptic rumor. Meanwhile, Edmure Tully gathered a small party to journey to the Twin. They prepared wagons with modest gifts for Walder Frey, casks of Riverrun wine, some fine cloth, tokens that might placate the old lord. Edmure was a reluctant diplomat, but he took the mission seriously. The morning of his departure, Ned and Rob stood by the main gate to see him off. Remember, Ned said, keeping his tone low, Walder Frey values courtesy as much as he does advantage. Flatter him gently. Show that we haven't forgotten his sacrifice. Edmure scoffed lightly. Sacrifice. He never lifts a finger for anyone unless he's paid. Still, I'll do my best to make him feel respected. Rob clasped his uncle's forearm. Travel safely, uncle. If you sense any danger or trickery, return at once. The roads aren't safe. Edmure nodded, then mounted his horse. A dozen men rode with him, their spears upright, the Tully trout emblazoned on their shields. The small convoy rumbled out under the raised portcullis, the hooves clattering on the bridge. Ned watched them go, remembering his own journey south from Winterfell months ago. It felt like a different life, one in which he believed in the righteousness of the throne and the bond of old friendships. Later that day, Ned found himself reviewing messages in the war room again. The routine had become an unending cycle of receiving scouts, planning defenses, distributing supplies, worrying over Sansa. He had begun to feel like a man drowning in parchment. By mid-afternoon, a hush fell over the fortress. The sky, though still overcast, had brightened slightly, and men took advantage of the lull in drizzle to mend armor in the courtyard. Ned took the opportunity to visit Jaime Lannister in his makeshift cell, a decision he had been putting off but knew was necessary. The King's Lair remained their most valuable bargaining chip, and Ned wanted to see firsthand that he was secure and not plotting some escape. The cell was located in the depths of Riverrun, a barred chamber more accustomed to holding petty criminals. A pair of stern guards stood at the door, swords at the ready. They bowed stiffly as Ned approached. "My Lord Stark," one said. "He's been quiet. Eats what we give him, paces sometimes." Ned motioned them aside, stepping in. The cell was dimly lit by torches set along the corridor wall. Jaime Lannister sat on a crude bench, manacles on his wrists, an iron chain linked to a ring in the stone floor. His once lustrous hair was unkempt. A faint bruise darkened his cheek. Despite this disheveled appearance, he still carried an air of arrogance, a half-smile curling his lips when he spotted Ned. "Lord Stark," Jaime said, leaning back against the wall. "Or should I call you the dead man returned?" He let out a sardonic chuckle. "I hear you've somehow slipped the noose. That's rather impressive." Ned kept his expression neutral. "I came to see that you were still here, safe. The Lannisters wouldn't be pleased if anything happened to you." Jaime shrugged, rattling the chain slightly. I doubt they care so much about my comfort, but yes, they wouldn't want me dead. At least not before they get their precious Sansa back. A pity you didn't bring that fiery daughter of yours with you. She was always my favorite." Ned's hand tightened at his side. He refused to rise to the bait. "You'll remain alive so long as Sansa does," he said calmly. "I trust you understand that if any harm comes to her, you'll pay in equal measure." Jaime cocked his head. "Oh, I do. But do you really think my sister is the type to play by your rules? That's what amuses me, Stark. You think threats and reason mean anything to her. But Cersei, she cares about her children, her power, and her pride. Everything else is a piece on her board." Ned met Jaime's mocking gaze. "Then you should hope your sister sees enough value in you to keep my daughter alive." Jaime's smile sharpened. "She's not your only child at risk, or so I've heard. That little one. Arya, lost in the wind, they say. How unfortunate. Perhaps she's rotting in some corner of Flea Bottom, or she's halfway across the narrow sea." He spoke as though he relished every flicker of pain he might cause. Ned swallowed the anger that rose in his throat. "Your jests don't serve you, Lannister. You'll remain here until we have Sansa back and the war is ended. Or perhaps you'll remain here until you rot, if the Queen keeps refusing to negotiate." Jaime shrugged again, looking unperturbed. "Better men than you have tried to keep me locked away forever. In the end, the game always shifts. Enjoy your moment, Stark. Perhaps you'll keep your daughter safe. Perhaps you won't." Ned turned to go, unwilling to prolong the conversation. As he reached the cell door, Jaime's voice followed him, soft but pointed. "Just remember, the further you push, the more my sister pushes back. I hope Sansa's strong enough to endure that." Outside in the corridor, Ned forced the tension from his shoulders. Jaime's words stung. He tried to console himself with the thought that the Kingslayer was likely grasping at straws, trying to shake Ned's resolve. Yet part of him feared that Jaime was right about Cersei's ruthlessness. She would not be cowed by threats alone. When he returned to the upper levels, he found Catelyn waiting with worry etched on her face. "Is he well?" she asked, though her tone dripped with distaste. Ned nodded. "He's well enough. Still arrogant," she sighed. "At least he's alive. May the gods grant that Sansa remains so too." Natas. That evening, a swirl of wind tugged at the torches in the courtyard, and men huddled near braziers for warmth. Ned dined in a smaller chamber with Robb, Catelyn, and a handful of Lord. The meal was simple: pottage of barley and carrots with slices of salted pork. War had worn on their supplies, but the fare sufficed to keep the men fed. Conversations circled around the same grim topics: potential infiltration, Walder Frey's demands, Tywin's rumored maneuvers. From time to time, Robb's gaze drifted into the distance, as if he struggled to keep his thoughts from Sansa. When they finished eating, Ned set his spoon aside and quietly suggested to Robb that they revisit the Godswood. Perhaps the hush of that place might offer a sliver of calm. They slipped away from the hall, leaving the others to their talk. Catelyn remained behind with the Greatjon, who insisted on discussing tomorrow's patrol routes. Ned was grateful for a moment of quiet with his son. They made their way through the stone passages, out into the rear courtyard, where the small Godswood of Riverrun stood. The leaves of the single weirwood glistened with leftover rain, red and wet, its trunk white as bone. A few mossy stones surrounded the base. The pool that lay at the center was still, reflecting torchlight in broken ripples. Robb moved to the tree and placed a hand on its trunk, as though seeking communion with the old gods. Ned stood a pace behind, remembering Winterfell's far larger Godswood. He recalled the times he knelt in prayer there, the heart tree looming above with its solemn face. He missed the hush of those old groves, the sense of belonging that the North exuded. Here, everything felt like a pale echo. But it was better than nothing. After a moment, Robb turned. "Sometimes, Father, I feel as though the old gods are silent," he whispered. "We pray for deliverance, and each day the war grows darker." Ned laid a hand on Robb's shoulder. "The gods speak in their own time, not always in the way we expect. The North knows patience. We must wait and watch for small signs." The night air stirred, carrying the scent of wet grass and the faint tang of the river. Crickets chirped, A gentle chorus in the silence. Rob's gaze rested on the pool. "I dream of home," he said softly. "Of Winterfell's courtyard under the snow, of the hot springs steaming in the cold air. I never appreciated it enough until now." Ned felt a lump in his throat. "I dream of it too, and I dream of Arya. Wherever she is, I hope she's safe. We must hold on to that hope." Rob nodded, his expression solemn. Grey Wind, who had followed them at a respectful distance, padded forward, sniffing at the weirwood's roots. The direwolf raised its head suddenly, ears pricking at some distant sound. Rob tensed, but after a moment, the wolf settled again. Perhaps just a passing guard's footsteps. Ned sighed. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow brings more decisions. We wait for word from Edmure, from the scouts near Harrenhal, from King's Landing. If they deign to reply." Together they left the Godswood, the hush lingering behind them like a held breath. Over the next few days, routine set in again. Patrols rode out at dawn, returning at dusk with scant intelligence. Tywin's forces had not yet made a decisive move, though rumors swirled that fresh troops arrived at Harrenhal, possibly mercenaries from Essos. Ned worried that the longer Tywin bided his time, the more he might be assembling an unstoppable army. Meanwhile, the letter from the Queen Regent still loomed in everyone's mind. A black cloud. No second message had arrived from King's Landing, no negotiation, only silence that felt ominous. On the fourth day, a scout returned breathless to the gates, demanding audience with King Robb and Lord Stark. Ned met him in the courtyard, alongside Robb and a handful of men. The scout's horse was lathered with sweat, and the man himself reeked of fear and exhaustion. He dismounted, bowing hastily. "Your Grace, my lords, I bring dire news from the outskirts near Harrenhal. Tywin's host is on the move, 1,000 strong. Banners of the Lion everywhere. They march northward, crossing the Trident near the ruins of a small crossing. They seem to be heading in our direction, or perhaps to the Twins. Hard to say, but they're definitely moving in force." "Then I want that." Robb's eyes flashed. "How quickly?" "They could be in the Riverlands proper within a week. Maybe less if they push hard." The scout ran a trembling hand through his hair. "We saw outriders too. Good cavalry. They might outrun the main column and reach us sooner." Ned felt the blood drain from his face. So the hammer was finally falling. Tywin had massed his forces, and now he advanced. Riverrun might soon be caught in a siege, or Tywin might attempt to slip around them, heading for the Twins or deeper into the north. But either way, a confrontation was imminent. Robb stood straighter. "We'll summon our bannermen, fortify Riverrun, and prepare for battle. The men in the field must be recalled. We can't let Tywin pick us off piecemeal." Great John Umber, who had come up behind them, let out a fierce grin. "Eight to last. A proper fight. We'll show the Lannisters the fangs of the north." Ned, however, felt only a grim sense of foreboding. War was savage and costly. The memories of Robert's rebellion still haunted him, the men who died at the Trident, the families left in ashes. Now it was his son, leading an entire realm into that furnace. The time for a measured response had passed. Tywin was coming, and with him, the vow of vengeance if House Stark refused to kneel. The fortress bustled with sudden urgency. Horns sounded from the walls, summoning captains and men-at-arms. Orders rang out, echoing through corridors. Archers were directed to vantage points. Stores of grain were inventoried for siege. Catelyn organized the wounded and the vulnerable, ensuring they had safer quarters in the deep cellars. The clang of steel on steel filled the courtyard as blacksmiths hammered swords and spears anew. Even the horses seemed tense, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Robb called a war council immediately, and Ned joined him. The hall filled with the North's lords and the River lords. Bolton arrived in silence, standing at the back, arms folded. The Greyjohn loomed near the front, face set in eager fury. They ringed a large map pinned to a table. Robb placed a figurine representing Tywin's host to the south, sliding it forward to indicate progress. "If Tywin marches on Riverrun directly," Robb said, "we have the advantage of the castle's defenses. But if he tries to bypass us, heading west or north, We risk him cutting our supply lines or isolating us here. We must be ready to meet him in the field if need be. One of the Riverlords, Jason Mallister, pointed at the map. If we move out to meet him, we abandon the fortress. A siege undone is one thing, but if he outnumbers us, the field might be worse. Then, San, the great John pounded the table. We'll stand behind our walls if we must, but better to meet them with steel. The Lannisters will think twice if we strike them before they're fully prepared. Roose Bolton offered a small, cold smile. We need more information on Tywin's supply lines. If we can harass them, perhaps we can force him to slow or redirect. Robb looked to Ned. What say you, father? Ned studied the map. Riverrun's defenses are strong, but Tywin is cunning. He might try to starve us out or draw us into a trap. We can't ignore that possibility. He knows we have Jaime, so we hold a valuable piece. He might not want to risk Jaime's life, or he might assume we won't harm Jaime if Sansa lives. We can't rely on that to protect us. He paused. We might send out a portion of our forces to harry his flanks, slow his advance, whittle him down. Meanwhile, we keep Riverrun garrisoned. If he splits his forces, we can try to defeat them in detail. The men weighed his words. Robb nodded slowly. We'll do it. Great Joan, you'll lead a host of 2,000 to scout Tywin's approach. Avoid open battle unless you see a clear advantage. Retreat if threatened. Demonstrate. The Great Joan grinned fiercely. I'll give them a good chase. Robb's gaze swept the room. If Tywin reaches our walls, we'll hold. But I won't be trapped here indefinitely. We'll watch for the right moment to strike or to force negotiation. Now, let's make our preparation. The lords dispersed, some to rouse their men, others to check the fortress defenses. Robb stood with Ned, hands braced on the table. It's begun in earnest, he said, voice subdued. We'll see how the Lannisters respond when faced with a real battle. Ned squeezed his son's shoulder. Stay wary. We don't know what cunning moves Tywin has prepared, but we'll face him together. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the fortress towers, horns sounded again, not for alarm, but to summon men to final drill before nightfall. The courtyard filled with the clang of arms and the shuffle of ranks. Ned stood at the parapet with Catelyn, watching rows of pikemen form up. Robb oversaw them below, Grey Wind pacing at his side. They looked determined, Catelyn remarked, though her voice trembled at the edges. But I know war too well. Determination isn't always enough. Ned placed an arm around her shoulders. It's all we have at the moment. That, and the bond of our cause. The men believe in Robb. They believe in the North, and in me, returned from the grave. He tried to manage a wan smile. We cannot fail them. She turned to him, eyes reflecting the dim light. We have to protect our children. That is all I ask the gods, day and night. He nodded, heart heavy, for in the morning, everything might change. Word would spread that Tywin was coming, and fear would mount. Perhaps in the days to come, they would see the Lannister banners on the horizon. They would see the dust of thousands of boots marching. And if it came to a siege, Sansa's life would hang by an even thinner thread, for no raven-bearing mercy had yet arrived. Late in the night, Ned found himself unable to sleep. He returned to the war room, alone, letting the torchlight guide him. The maps lay splayed across the table, the small figurines representing armies scattered like children's toys. He pushed the one labeled Lannisters forward, imagining the unstoppable weight of Tywin's forces. Then he picked up the piece symbolizing their own host, the direwolf sigil carved into its base. He moved it in a defensive stance, trying to envision a possible victory, or at least a stalemate that might lead to Sansa's release. A droplet of sweat trickled down his temple. When had the room grown so warm? Or was it just the flush of anxiety? He inhaled slowly, reminding himself to remain steady. War demanded a steady hand, not flights of panic. He recalled the hope he had felt upon escaping King's Landing, relief at being alive, joy at reuniting with Robb and Catelyn. That hope had propelled him through the first difficult weeks. But now the specter of Tywin's army threatened to overshadow everything. He saw no easy path, only the promise of bloodshed. "You have no right to yield," he told himself quietly, though in his mind's ear he spoke to Sansa, to Arya, to Bran and Rickon back in Winterfell. "You must see this through." When the torch guttered, casting flickering shadows across the walls, he finally turned away, leaving the war table behind. Tomorrow they would prepare for Tywin's approach, set watchers in the highest towers, dispatch swift horsemen to track every Lannister maneuver. The day after, perhaps, the first skirmish. The realm teetered on the edge of a blade, and House Stark had chosen its stance. The North would not kneel, the North would not yield. His heart pounded as he made his way down the dark corridor to his chamber. Outside, the night pressed against the fortress like a living thing, the hush broken only by the distant calls of watchmen on the ramparts. In the black sky, a few wan stars flickered through ragged clouds. Ned paused at a narrow window, gazing up at them. "One day," he murmured, "we will see Winterfell again under peaceful skies." Whether that day would be soon or in the far future, or even if he himself would live to see it, he could not say. But he held the image in his mind, a final fragment of solace as he closed himself into his chamber and blew out the single candle, letting the darkness enfold him. There, in the silence, he lay awake, listening to the fortress breathe, feeling the tremor of coming war as tangibly as a thunderstorm on the horizon. In that moment he whispered a prayer to the old gods, not for victory, but for the safety of those he loved. Sansa, Arya, Catelyn, and all who placed their faith in House Stark. Then he closed his eyes, letting the weight of exhaustion drag him under, into a restless sleep that would end too soon with the call of horns at dawn.